Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when the lights didn't just flicker out. They shattered like a dropped amphora. You've probably heard of the Bronze Age, that shimmering, sword-clanking era of palaces, pyramids and bureaucrats who thought they had it all figured out. Well, tonight, you'll get a front row seat to what it was really like when that whole world collapsed. Not poetically, not slowly, brutally, systematically, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. But hey, you'll give it a try, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I always love knowing who's staying up too late with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts, not with an explosion, but with silence. The kind of silence that creeps in when the trade ships stop arriving. You're a trader's son, no scratch that, the third son of a trader. And your family has lived on the edge of a lively Canaanite port for generations. You're used to the rhythmic clang of unloading cargo, the multilingual shouting of dock workers, and the smell, gods, the smell, of salted fish, oiled papyrus, and imported incense. But lately the docks are too quiet. The Egyptians stopped sending merchants months ago. The Cypriot copper, which once filled your family's warehouse in gleaming red slabs, hasn't been seen in over a season. At first, everyone blamed the wind, then the sun, then the gods. But now, people just mutter and move on. You wake up one morning to find your father pacing. He's done the math. No copper means no bronze. No bronze means no tools, no weapons, and no trade. You don't understand the full scope yet. You're still too young, maybe 14, but the tone in his voice makes your stomach drop. Something big is unravelling. Later that day, a scribe from the palace runs down the main street clutching a tablet like it's Honor. He shouts for someone, anyone, to come translate a message from Ugarit, another port city up north. It's fragmented, but the panic is unmistakable. The enemy is near. We don't know where they come from. Our ships are gone. You lean out your window and watch him run past. You don't know it yet, but that's the last message anyone will receive from Ugarit. Within weeks, it's gone, burned to the ground, its clay libraries charred, its princes dead or disappeared. Whatever's coming is swallowing cities like a sea monster. One gulp at a time. The grown-ups still talk in cautious optimism, but you can feel the tension knotting around your town like a tightening rope. At night, your neighbours light fewer lamps. Voices drop to whispers. Someone nails shut the temple doors. And then, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary afternoon, you hear screaming. Not panic, not drama. Real screaming, the kind that shatters your bones before you even know why. You race toward the sound barefoot, heart stuttering like a rabbit's. Smoke curls upward from the palace compound. A section of the outer wall has collapsed. Stones split open like bread, and fire leaps up the sides of the grain store. There's no attack, not yet. No armies at the gate, just fire and confusion. You hear people shouting about sabotage, about angry servants, about divine punishment. You don't see your father. You find your older brother on the edge of the crowd, his tunic dark with soot. His face is stone. "It's over," he says, as if he's announcing the end of the harvest or the death of a goat. The palace is gone. You spend that night huddled on the roof of your house with your mother and little sister, watching the embers dance across what used to be the administrative district. There were once tax collectors, accountants, royal guards with polished bronze greaves. Now, smoke, ash, and people walking in slow, stunned circles with nothing in their hands. The next morning you join a group hauling charred wood away from the smouldering ruins. Someone tries to organise a bucket line to save the grain stores, but most of the buckets are gone, stolen or burned or just lost in the chaos. There's no king to give orders, no guards to enforce anything, and weirdly that feels freeing? You're not sure whether to be scared or relieved. Probably both. By the end of the week, the markets are almost empty. You trade a copper pendant, your last, for a pouch of barley and a ragged sandal that doesn't quite fit. Someone says the Egyptians have retreated south. The Hittites? Wiped out. The Mycenaeans? Not answering any messengers. And the Assyrians? Well, they're still standing, but no one wants to go near those guys right now. Your town council tries to keep order. They post proclamations on clay tablets, but no one reads them. The scribes stopped showing up anyway. You heard one ran off to become a fisherman. Another is building a boat to follow the stars. Honestly, you don't blame them. One night your mother tells you stories from her childhood, of great palaces and feasts where honey cakes were stacked in towers and people wore silver-threaded robes. She says things will get better, but her voice trembles. That's when it hits you. The world you were born into is already gone. You're not living through a storm, you're waking up in its aftermath. The only question left is, how do you rebuild a life from rubble? Here's one historical fact. Ugarit, a major Bronze Age city, really did send a last desperate letter asking for help, which never arrived. The city was destroyed shortly after. And here's something fringe for you. Some fringe scholars have suggested that solar flares or geomagnetic storms may have played a role in destabilizing civilizations by disrupting climate or communication networks. It's speculative, sure, but fun to imagine the sun as a silent saboteur. Meanwhile, among academics, there's still no full consensus on what caused the Bronze Age collapse, whether it was systems failure, drought, war, famine, or just an awful combination of all the above. The debate continues, but for now, you roll up your sleeves, wipe ash from your eyes, and start collecting stones to build something new. Anything. Because what choice do you have? The morning air is heavy with the smell of scorched cedar and fermented grain. You wake early, throat dry, ears still ringing faintly from the palace fire, 3 days ago. People move differently now, quieter, more focused, like they're trying to blend into the ruins rather than disturb them. You've learnt not to ask questions. You simply watch, listen, adapt. Today you help clear out the last of the royal storerooms. It's strange stepping through the grand double doors that once required bowing and permission and now hang crooked on their hinges. Inside, the soot-dark walls flicker with sunlight through collapsed beams. You spot clay jars, blackened but intact. You and the others crack them open. Some contain spoiled lentils, some just ash, but one still holds a treasure. Dried dates, not many, but enough to share. You take one, chew slowly, and for a moment it tastes like yesterday. Outside, the city feels hollow. The nobles have fled or vanished. No one dares call themselves king, but a few soldiers still linger near the gate, dazed, swords sheathed, unsure if they're still allowed to give orders. The market stalls are mostly empty. You see a few people haggling over mouldy barley and a goat that looks like it's halfway through giving up. You walk past the old writing school where the scribes used to drill you on wedge-shaped letters and official records. The stone tablet by the door is cracked, half buried in rubble. No one has come to salvage the records. That's when you realise nothing official matters anymore. Royal laws, tax ledgers, records of grain shipments from Cyprus. Meaningless. The scribes, once so proud, have stopped showing up. A neighbour you hardly know waves you over. She's smearing mud onto a broken wall trying to rebuild her family's home. "Help me," she asks. No titles, no bribes, just work. You nod, step into the mud and join her. The afternoons stretch longer now. There's no more bell to mark time, no royal edicts to dictate your tasks. You and a growing group of neighbours start scavenging building materials from the half-collapsed administrative district. You take stones, beams, even broken bronze plaques, worthless now, but they make strong foundations. You rip old scrolls into strips to bind cracked pottery. Every scrap matters. You remember the palace courtyard where visiting traders once brought gifts. Obsidian from Anatolia, blue glass amulets from Egypt, ivory from somewhere too far south to pronounce. That supply chain is gone, snapped like a thread. The copper shipments dried up weeks before the fires. And without copper, there's no bronze. And without bronze, your sickles dull quickly. Your spearhead broke last week during a fishing trip, and now your brother carries a sharpened bone knife when he checks the traps. One evening, as you and a few others build a cook fire from crumbled roof beams, you hear an elder muttering something like a prayer. He's kneeling beside what's left of the temple, tracing a spiral into the dirt. "The gods are angry," he says without looking at anyone. "They turn their faces away." You want to believe him. It's easier to think this is punishment than to face the truth. The system's just failed, one domino after another. No food, no trade, no leaders, no answers. Even the priests don't pretend to know anymore. Your town's head priest vanished during the fires. Some say he ran. Others whisper he was taken by the Sea Peoples. Ah, the Sea Peoples. That's a name you hear more often now in half-choked warnings and overcooked rumours. Raiders from across the sea, warriors with horned helmets, entire families sailing in ramshackle flotillas. One man claims to have seen their ships offshore. Another swears they eat their dead. The truth is more complicated, of course, but fear doesn't ask for footnotes. One day a boy your age arrives, barefoot and sunburnt. He says he walked from Ashkelon, which is now just smouldering ruins. He lost his sister in a stampede during the fire. He doesn't cry when he tells you this, he just stares straight ahead like someone watching the world through smoke. Your mother gives him bread and you let him sleep on the floor beside you that night. The next morning you help him build a hut from salvaged wall planks. It's not much, but he smiles for the first time when it stands upright without tipping. You both laugh and it feels strange, like your mouth forgot how to do it. Here's a real historical fact. Palace complexes across the eastern Mediterranean, like those in Mycenae, Hattusa and Ugarit, were destroyed or abandoned during the collapse. Archaeological layers show fire damage and sudden disruption. And here's something weird. A few cities left half-baked clay tablets in the kilns, interrupted mid-message, as if the scribes simply ran out the door and never came back. They never got to fire them, like frozen alarm bells from 3,000 years ago. As for scholarly debates, oh, there's plenty. Some historians argue these weren't just collapses, they were shifts in human organisation, a decentralisation, rather than a total end. Others say that's just romanticising disaster. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between, chaos for some, opportunity for others. But for you, survival is more intimate than abstract theories. It means boiling water from the cracked cistern. It means patching old sandals with flax thread. It means drying fish on woven reeds and learning to tell edible weeds from poisonous ones. And it means adjusting to the reality that nobody is coming to save you. You sit on a hilltop one dusk, looking out over your broken town. The palace is just a jagged silhouette now, but behind it smoke curls from new hearths, homes being rebuilt with mud, clay and stubborn hope. There's no more gold leaf, no more diplomats in perfumed robes, but there are children playing in the dust with clay figures, their laughter cutting through the gloom like birdsong. You're not sure if things are getting better, but they're changing, and you're still here. You wake to the sound of grinding stone. Not danger, not shouting, just a rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape from the courtyard. It's your mother sharpening a broken bit of bronze on a flat stone slab, trying to coax a usable edge from what used to be a fine sickle. The handle's long gone, replaced with a piece of driftwood wrapped in goat gut. Still, it might cut enough barley to make the effort worth it. Maybe. There's no marketplace anymore, not in the way you remember it. The stalls are still there, some of them anyway, leaning like drunks after a long night. But the trade is gone. No ships, no caravans, no silver coins, or even the clunky tin bars people used to lug around. Instead, a sort of quiet bartering has taken over. You trade your repaired sickle for a bundle of dried onions. Someone else trades goat dung for firewood. And a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue seems to have cornered the market on pickled fish. Everyone's figuring it out as they go. Nobody talks about wealth anymore. The people who used to be important now count their fortune in lentils and wool scraps. There's a guy who used to be a palace administrator, well-groomed, perfumed, a master of 10 languages. Now he's out in the hills trapping quail with a net made of his wife's old veil. He came by last week to trade 2 birds for a chunk of sun-dried clay bread, and he didn't even try to pretend he wasn't desperate. The old storage rooms have turned into communal pantries. Anyone with something to share leaves it in sealed jar. In return, you take what you need. A few fights broke out in the beginning. Someone stole barley. Someone else accused a child of hoarding. But eventually a rhythm emerged. The rule now is simple. Don't be greedy, or you're out. You help your neighbour, the one who lost her roof in the fire, patch her walls with woven reeds and mud. In return, she teaches you how to preserve goat milk with ash and salt. The trick, she says, is trusting your nose. You nod seriously, even though you're already halfway sure you'll mess it up. But you'll try. One afternoon, you walk with your older brother down to what's left of the trade docks. It's eerily still. The water licks the stones quietly, but there are no sails on the horizon, no calls from sailors, no crates waiting to be claimed. The wooden posts, once thick with ropes and nets, are weathered and broken. A few planks float nearby, slowly turning green with sea slime. He tells you a rumour he heard, about a village upriver that still has working bronze tools. Not many, but enough to draw attention. He wants to go scout it out. Maybe barter, maybe trade, maybe stay if it seems safer than here. You ask if he's leaving for good, and he just shrugs. I'm not sure there is a for good anymore, he says. The next morning he's gone. No goodbye. Just his fishing knife left on your mat. and a half-filled water skin tucked near the door. You're not even angry, just hollow. But you use the knife later that day to strip bark for kindling, and somehow that feels like a blessing. Here's a historical fact. After the Bronze Age collapse, entire economies regressed to hyper-local exchange systems. In some areas, especially around the Levant and parts of Anatolia, coinage wouldn't reappear for centuries. Barter wasn't just a backup system, it was the system. Value became fluid. One day, a dried fish was worth a handful of barley. The next, it was worthless because the fish had spoiled. And here's something weird. Some archaeologists believe that during this period people began burying small caches of scrap metal, broken tools, twisted bronze fragments, even bent jewellery, almost like emergency savings accounts. Not to use, not yet, but to hoard, as if they believed bronze might one day matter again, or maybe they were just clinging to old instincts. The scholars still argue over what really happened during this economic unravelling. Some think it was the result of a total collapse in long-distance trade, especially the collapse of the Cypriot copper trade, which was crucial to making bronze. Others argue it wasn't the trade itself, but the centralised redistribution systems that failed. Once the palace bureaucracies fell, no one was organising shipments, storing surplus or protecting routes. That vacuum was the real killer. Back in your village, people start getting clever. An old carpenter with half a hand invents a plough made from bone and driftwood. It's ugly, but it digs. A teenager figures out how to twist nettles into rope strong enough to hang wet baskets. Someone else starts collecting bits of broken tile to form a sort of currency, or at least a shared system of markers. You find yourself keeping a little pouch of your own, one shard painted red, two blue, and one with a spiral scratched into it. No one agrees what they're worth, but they feel useful. The strangest part? You're starting to like the quiet. It's not peace, too much hunger and fear for that, but there's something calming about not living under someone's thumb. No tax collectors, no soldiers bullying your uncle for bread, no priests demanding sacrifice to gods who never seem to listen. Life is stripped down now. Smaller, but it's yours. That evening a storm rolls in from the sea. You and your mother hurry to cover the windows with reed mats, and your sister tries to catch raindrops in a broken ladle. As the wind howls, you huddle together around a clay lamp, and your mother hums a song from her own childhood. You ask her what it means, and she smiles faintly. "I think it was about planting seeds," she says, "but I only remember the tune." And you sit there in a house built from the bones of a collapsed palace, holding a pouch of pottery shards and dreaming about seeds you might plant tomorrow. Because somehow you're still here. Your hands ache from another day of wrestling the earth. You've spent the last week trying to coax life from soil that feels more like old brick than anything willing to feed you. With the old irrigation canals choked with debris and the palace engineers long gone, water management has become an improvised art. You and a few others have started digging shallow trenches by hand, trying to redirect spring runoff and save what little moisture the cracked land still holds. It's frustrating, muddy and exhausting, but when you see the tiniest green shoot poke out of the earth near your toe, you almost cry. The truth is, you weren't trained for this. No one was. You grew up around merchants and ledgers, not fields and livestock. Your father dealt in copper and cedar, not goats and millet. But that world's dead now, smouldering under ruins and old gods. You're learning to be someone else, a survivor, a farmer, a scavenger, a question nobody knows how to answer. Today you try repairing your last bronze spade. The edge is bent, not beyond use, but close. You heat it over coals until it glows dull orange, then hammer it flat with a rock wrapped in leather. It's not elegant. It's not even particularly effective, but it'll turn soil, sort of. Your neighbour walks by and laughs. "Looks like it belongs in a museum," he says. You laugh too, though neither of you knows what a museum is. The joke still lands. As you dig, you think about what's really changed. You used to believe that the people who ran the palaces, the ones who spoke 10 languages and wore gold-trimmed robes, were smarter, more advanced, even somehow better. But now you know they weren't ready either. When the trade routes collapsed, they starved just like everyone else. Their wealth turned into smoke. Their gods stopped listening. Every day now is a balance between fear and ingenuity. You've learned to stretch goat milk into thin curds and preserve them with salt, thanks to an old woman who showed you how while cackling like it was a divine secret. You've helped gut fish with flint tools and cook them on flat stones near the fire. You've watched your sister make sandals out of woven bark. She ties them around her ankles with strips of dried grass and walks like she's wearing royal slippers. You and your neighbours have started holding evening gatherings, not quite festivals, not yet, but shared meals, if there's enough to go around. Someone brings fermented barley mash that tastes like river mud but makes you laugh anyway. Someone else sings a half-forgotten hymn in a language no one fully understands. You don't care. The melody feels warm like soup. For a few hours it's easy to forget the walls are mud brick, and that the palace nearby is still half burnt and filled with ghosts. Then someone asks us about the trade networks, when they'll come back. A man from another village says he heard that Cyprus is still trading in secret, but that's just talk. Someone else claims the Egyptians have withdrawn behind stone walls, hoarding grain for their own elite. The talk gets quiet again after that. Nobody knows who to trust anymore. Rumours have become a kind of currency, cheap, dangerous, often wrong. Here's a solid historical fact. After the Bronze Age collapse, trade across the Eastern Mediterranean didn't just pause, it evaporated. The vast commercial web that once stretched from Greece to Mesopotamia disintegrated in less than a generation. Imported goods became rarities. Copper, the lifeblood of bronze, no longer flowed in. Without copper, societies couldn't make weapons or tools at scale. It was like trying to run a factory without electricity. And here's something fringe, a theory whispered at the edge of academia. Some believe that part of the reason for the collapse was a total disruption of the tin trail, the elusive supply chain that brought tin from distant lands into the Levant. No tin, no bronze, no tools. Some speculate tin may have come from as far away as Central Asia or even Britain, and that a breakdown in one link of that massive chain brought the entire system crashing down. It sounds extreme, but then again, you're living proof that systems do crash. The scholarly debates rage on. Was it climate, war, earthquakes, mass migration? Yes, and yes. The popular theory is systems collapse, a combination of over-centralisation, fragile supply lines, dependence on elite bureaucracy, and external shocks like drought or invasion. You don't know any of that, of course, but you feel it in your bones. The world got too big, too complicated, and when it cracked, the break was everywhere. But even in the aftermath, you see glimmers of something new. The fields you've dug are slowly showing signs of life. Not much, some early barley shoots, a few tufts of lentils, but enough to stir hope. One of your neighbours has begun experimenting with composting scraps and fish guts, trying to enrich the dry earth. It smells awful, but her patch is the greenest among you. One of the old scribes returns, but not to teach. He sets up a small stand near the remains of the temple and offers to write messages for people, on wood, bark, even flat stones. Not in cuneiform, not anymore, just simple scratches, drawings, family symbols. A new language built from desperation. You give him a smooth piece of tile one evening and ask him to mark it with your family's name. He draws a sun, a wave, and a sheaf of barley. You don't correct him. It feels right. At night, you sleep lighter than before. Every noise could be a raider or an animal, or just the wind, but your body no longer startles the way it used to. The fear hasn't gone, it's just folded itself into your routine like hunger, like grief. One morning you wake early and walk down to the coast where the first light brushes the broken harbour stones with gold. The sea is calm. You spot a lone bird skimming the water, wings trailing like fingers across the surface. You sit and watch until the sun crests the horizon. Behind you the village is waking. Someone's singing again. You don't know what the world will become, but today there's dirt under your nails, fire in your hearth, and barley in the ground, and that for now is enough. The morning starts quietly, but with a tension you've come to recognise, the kind that builds in your gut before anything actually happens. You feel it in the slow way people speak, in the way your mother watches the horizon between each chore, in the fact that the goats seem restless and skittish before the sun's even high. You've learned to listen to animals more than oracles these days. The goats know things. You're in the fields when the shouting starts, short, urgent, not panic yet, but leaning toward it. You run up the hill with a few others and find a group of villagers gathered near the lookout post, just a tall stack of rubble with a flat stone on top, manned in shifts by whoever isn't limping or sick. Today it's a boy too young to hold a spear. He's pointing toward the hills, breathless, muttering about figures on the ridge. Not many, maybe 4 or 5. Raiders, migrants, scouts. You all exchange glances like someone might suddenly have an answer, but of course no one does. This is the world now. Every new group you spot might be death or dinner guests. You take your knife, dull as it is, and stand behind one of the older men who still has a real bronze spear. A whisper of strategy travels the crowd. Don't provoke them, but don't leave the grain unguarded. A few people run to hide tools. Someone covers the communal jar of dried lentils with a broken slab of limestone. And you? You just breathe slowly, trying to shrink into the shadows. But when the strangers arrive, something unexpected happens. They are not warriors. They are not even armed, not really. Just a tangle of people, gaunt and sunburned, dragging a cart with a broken wheel and a baby wrapped in goat fleece. One of them raises a hand in greeting. Another speaks, words you don't fully recognise, but their tone is clear. Desperation. One of the elders steps forward and speaks in halting phrases, cobbling together bits of Hittite, Canaanite and some old trader's dialect. Turns out the group is from inland. Their village collapsed during the drought 2 summers ago. They've been walking for weeks, lost a child, buried an elder. They're not here to raid. They're looking for somewhere that still has food. And maybe mercy. You all gather in the central courtyard while the council discusses what to do. It's not a real council, not anymore. Just a loose group of whoever showed up often enough to seem responsible. Your mother is one of them. She speaks calmly, but you notice her hand gripping her knee, white-knuckled. The debate lasts hours. Resources are tight. Trust is tighter. But in the end, you let them stay, under conditions. They help in the fields. They contribute to defence. They follow your rhythms, not their own. The newcomers nod and bow and say thank you in 3 different languages. One of them, a wiry man with cracked lips and clever fingers, offers to fix tools. He was a woodworker once. You give him your bent spade, he gives you back something that almost looks new. Here's a real historical fact. Kist. Mass migration during the Bronze Age collapse wasn't limited to the infamous Sea Peoples. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, populations moved in waves. Some fleeing famine, others escaping war, many just chasing the possibility of survival. Entire towns abandoned their homelands. Some scholars now believe this constant movement reshaped languages, religions, and cultural practices in fundamental ways. And now for something strange. There's a theory, fringe, of course, that some of these migrants weren't entirely unknown. Some scholars have posited that in a few cases, migrants were actually refugees from once great cities, travelling under new identities, blending into peasant life. The collapse may have created a world where former nobility had to rebrand themselves as commoners just to survive. Whether it's true or not, it does make you eye that tall woman in the new group a little differently. She speaks with an eerie authority. She knows too much about court customs. She braids her hair like the Queen of Tyre. As for scholarly debate, the Sea Peoples are still a mystery. Who were they, really? Pirates? Mercenaries? Displaced peoples looking for land? Some think they were a coalition of different ethnic groups, pushed together by famine and conflict. Others think they were the cause of the collapse, not the symptom. But what's often overlooked is that many of them were likely just like your visitors, tired, scared, and looking for a place to call home. In the days that follow, the newcomers settle in. Awkwardly at first, there are stumbles. One of them accidentally takes water from the wrong well. Another cuts across a burial mound without realising it. But they work hard. They mend roofs, repair fences, show a few tricks for drying fish without fire. Slowly, suspicion turns into cautious tolerance. You befriend one of the children, a boy maybe 10 with a nasty cough and eyes like black olives. He shows you how to shape clay into animal figures, a trick from his old village. You show him how to catch lizards with a noose of grass. It's not much, but it's something. At night, he sleeps beside your family's hearth. He snores like a frog. You grow used to it. The village is changing, and you can feel it. There's tension, yes, and still plenty of hunger, but also motion. A sense that this isn't just a salvage yard of broken civilizations, but maybe, a seedbed of something new. One evening, you stand beside the fire pit with the newcomers and listen as they chant a harvest song. You don't understand the words, but you catch the rhythm. You feel it in your chest. It's not your music, not exactly, but you find your hands tapping along anyway. And you wonder, maybe this isn't about rebuilding what was, maybe it's about building something else entirely. You're sleeping lighter these days, the kind of half-sleep where one ear is always listening for footsteps that don't belong, or the silence that settles too thick before something bad. But this night, nothing comes, just the hum of insects and the low murmur of someone snoring across the courtyard. You wake to the smell of wood smoke, the kind that means breakfast and not disaster, and for a few seconds you let yourself believe things are stable. But by mid-morning, tension rolls in again, this time not from strangers on the ridge, but from within. One of the newcomers, the tall woman with courtly manners and mystery in her voice, has started drawing attention. She speaks with clarity, calmness, and the kind of poise that unsettles the council. Yesterday she offered suggestions on how to ration grain more efficiently. The day before she intervened in an argument between two goat herders and resolved it without anyone raising a hand. You hear whispers now, some calling her a gift, others muttering that she wants power. Power. A strange thing to talk about, considering your village council still holds meetings under a scorched fig tree and stores decisions on shards of pottery. But power, in whatever form it now takes, still matters. Later, she gathers a group to discuss rebuilding the north wall, what's left of it. She draws a plan in the dirt with a stick and people nod. Even the ones who don't trust her listen. That's new and dangerous. You can't help watching her closely. Her gestures remind you of someone directing servants, not equals. Her eyes scan the crowd with the cool calculation of someone used to managing people, not surviving among them. Still, she works, she digs, she shares food. She's not above the same hunger and blisters everyone else is. But still, she's different. The sea peoples come up again during an evening meal. One of the older men recounts the story of a nearby village that was overrun. They didn't even knock, he says, just rolled through like fire. But then the tall woman interrupts, calmly pointing out that sea peoples isn't a name. They don't call themselves that. It's what desperate cities wrote down on their final clay tablets, a label for anyone who came by sea and upset the balance. Maybe some were pirates. Others? Families like hers, who lost their homes to drought and just wanted land. You realise then, she may have once been one of them. Here's a strange truth from history. The sea peoples weren't a single group. They were likely a loose alliance of displaced populations from all over the Mediterranean. Sardinia, the Aegean, the Levant. Egypt's pharaohs recorded fierce battles with them, but also listed them in royal service afterward. The enemy became the labour force, the invader became the neighbour. And for your quirky detail, one Egyptian inscription claims that some of the sea peoples wore feathered headdresses and carried round shields with spiral designs, symbols that later show up in other unrelated cultures. Some historians wonder, did they influence future styles, or just carry remnants of fallen empires with them, like ghosts on their backs? Meanwhile, the academic world still debates whether the sea peoples were a cause or effect of the collapse. Were they the spark, or just the smoke from a fire already burning? You don't need a university to answer that. You've seen enough to know the line between victim and threat is always thinner than people think. Back in the village, the tall woman's ideas start sticking. She proposes using broken amphorae as guttering to catch rainwater, and it actually works. People take to calling her Ashra, though you're not sure if it's her name or a title. Some say she was once a priestess, others think she was a queen's handmaid. She never confirms or denies either. One afternoon you find yourself helping her lift stones for the new wall. She doesn't say much, just works with smooth efficiency, but when you stop to wipe your brow, she studies you and says, "You remember what it was like, don't you? The before times?" You nod. Slowly, you do. Later she gives your sister a length of blue thread. Faded, but clearly once luxurious. A reminder, she says, that beautiful things existed. Your sister wears it like a crown. Still, not everyone is enchanted. Some of the elders feel their authority slipping. One warns that no one should speak with the confidence of gods unless they can feed a village. Another mutters that it's dangerous to follow someone whose past is unknown. The tension grows again, now pointed inward. Then something happens. A boy goes missing. He was gathering firewood near the edge of the fields. When he doesn't come back by sundown, the village erupts. Search parties scatter in all directions, torches flickering in the dark. His mother screams his name into the night until her voice shreds. You help search, combing the rocks and a brush. Every shadow looks superiors. Every silence makes your throat tighten. He returns the next morning, shaken, scratched, but alive. He says he saw Strabon strangers watching from the hills. They didn't approach, they just stood there, silent. Motionless. That's enough to send the village into a frenzy. More defensive walls, bigger patrols, tighter food rations. The newcomers, including Ashra, are suddenly looked at with renewed suspicion. Someone paints a crude spiral on her door, the same kind the Sea Peoples were said to use. She doesn't erase it. She leaves it there, like a challenge. You see both sides, you understand the fear, but you also know what it means to be a stranger knocking on a closed door. You remember the first night you slept on the roof watching the palace burn. You remember thinking the gods had turned their backs. That night Ashra gathers a few villagers and starts telling a story. Not a speech, a tale, something old, a myth from her homeland, half remembered and twisted by time. It's about a sea spirit who loses her voice in a storm and washes ashore among enemies who become her kin. You sit in the back listening. The others lean in. When she finishes, the courtyard is silent. Not because they believe every word, but because, for a moment, it feels good to hear someone speak as if there might still be meaning in the mess. You go to bed thinking about the boy in the hills, about strangers who don't speak, about Ashra's stories and the spiral scratched into her door. The world is rebuilding itself out of fragments. Some of them are jagged, some still bleed, but some, just some, fit together better than before. The rain comes like a gift and a warning. At first, just a few tentative drops, like the sky is testing whether it remembers how. Then a steady drizzle, then a proper downpour, cold and sudden and glorious. Children race outside to dance barefoot in the muddy street, and even the old men come out from under their shelters just to feel it on their faces. No one complains. Not yet. You stand there too, your arms wide, letting the water soak through the dirt in your hair and the linen stitched too many times to still be called a tunic. But the joy is short-lived. The rain fills the storage pits too quickly. What's left of the canal overflows. The mud brick walls sag and groan like they're sighing their last. By morning, 2 homes have partially collapsed. One goat drowns, another goes missing. But the worst comes later, when you learn the communal grain cache, your village's last safety net, has started to rot. Someone forgot to reseal it before the storm. The sack soaked straight through. When you open the clay lid, the smell punches the back of your throat. People don't panic, not out loud, but you feel it. The tension comes back with teeth. Some blame the storm, others the council. A few glare openly at Ashra as if rain could be summoned by leadership they never consented to. She doesn't argue. She just kneels beside the ruined cache and starts scooping grain with her hands, quietly checking how much might still be saved. It's in the middle of this tension that someone suggests something new. If the old ways don't work, says a man with a scar from cheek to chin, maybe we try a new way. He stands on a rock to seem taller. He doesn't need to, but it's a classic move, and begins proposing a sort of temporary government. A council of shared voices. No kings, no priests, just volunteers, rotated monthly, representatives from every family. It's a radical idea, though no one calls it that. In a world where everything is to be vertical, gods at the top, kings beneath them, scribes below that, and you all scraping the bottom, it feels strange to even imagine something horizontal. Still, people listen. They're tired of depending on a few wise elders who may or may not actually be wise, and it's not like anyone's writing laws on tablets anymore. The next day, the village gathers to try it. Everyone gets a say, well, everyone who shows up. The toolmaker suggests using shards of pottery as ballots. Red for yes, grey for no. Each person drops a shard into a woven basket. It feels more like a game than governance, but at the end of it, the system holds. The first council of mud and barley is formed. Here's your historical moment. During and after the Bronze Age collapse, many places shifted from centralised, palace-based systems to localised, kin-based or tribal forms of governance. The vacuum left by fallen kings and destroyed bureaucracies had to be filled by someone or everyone. Evidence from places like early Iron Age Greece suggests that after the collapse, local councils or assemblies began to form, slowly evolving into the early frameworks of democratic thought. No, your village isn't inventing democracy, but it is inventing something that rhymes with it. And for a quirky footnote, in some post-collapse societies, people use broken pottery shards, ostraka, to record decisions, mark votes, or even curse enemies. One archaeologist found a shard inscribed with something like, "May his goats never bear young." Not very noble, but very human. Back in your village, the system starts awkwardly. People argue over what counts as a family. Someone insists the goats should count as voters. Another man just shows up with 5 different tunics and tries to vote in disguise. He's caught, teased, then put in charge of maintaining the voting baskets as punishment. Ashra is nominated to the council, and though some object she's voted in with a majority, she doesn't smile, she just nods and goes back to reinforcing the north wall with woven palm mats. You suspect she's been in power before, in one form or another, but now she's not alone. You find yourself drawn into it too. You start sitting in on the meetings, even if you don't speak much. You watch decisions get made about water distribution, shared guard shifts, food collection. It's messy, it's loud, but somehow it's working. Then someone brings up the idea of a code, a set of shared rules written down or at least spoken aloud in front of everyone. Not religious laws, not kingly decrees, just agreements. Don't steal grain, share tools, warn others if you see strangers. Don't let the goats eat the stored linen again. That last one causes laughter, but it gets added anyway. They call it the four hands promise, after the image someone draws in the dust. Four hands linked in a circle. Not binding, not sacred, but symbolic. It's painted onto the council hut in red dye, and for the first time in a long while, the village feels like something more than a scatter of survivors. Here's the scholarly debate of the hour. Did collapse break societies, or did it make them more flexible? Some historians argue that smaller communities were more agile, more adaptable, and actually benefited in the long run from the absence of imperial oversight. Others think that's an overly romantic interpretation. After all, starvation and chaos don't tend to be liberating. Still, your little mud brick experiment is proof that human beings, when stripped of palaces, gods and gold, will still try to organise themselves into something functional. You spend your days working with people you never used to speak to. The man who once tried to shortchange your family in the market now helps you build a new grain drying shed. The former scribe teaches your sister how to track time using shadow sticks. You catch Ashra once staring permanently at the mountains like they're whispering to her. She seems tired, like she knows something's coming, but for now, the village breathes easier. You have walls that hold, food stores that aren't moulding, and a way to make decisions that doesn't involve shouting or swords. One night, during a rare moment of calm, the council holds a small feast. Nothing extravagant, just roasted roots, dried fruit, and that terrible fermented mash someone insists is ceremonial. You all sit in a circle, watching the stars blink into place. Someone begins humming, then singing, and others join in. You recognise the song. It's one of the old ones, royal sacred ones. Now it's just a tune owned by everyone. The collapse is still real. The losses are still carved into every stone and shadow. But tonight, something flickers in your chest, but not hope exactly. Maybe just coherence. You lie back in the dirt, arms behind your head, and feel the warmth of people breathing around you. No palaces, no kings, just clay, smoke, and a voice that says, "We're still here." The first thing you notice when you wake up is the silence. Thick and wide and too perfect. Not the sleepy quiet of early morning or the lull between winds, but the kind of silence that makes animals uneasy. No birdsong, no creaking of rope. Even the goats aren't bleating. That's never a good sign. You sit up slowly, scanning the rooftops. The sky's overcast, smeared with low-grey clouds, but that's not unusual. What is unusual is the woman running up the hill with her hands in the air and no sandals on. "They're back!" she shouts, and it cuts through the quiet like a dropward blade. The ones from the hills watching again. You move faster than you expect, grabbing your half-sharpened bone knife and a thick stick that passes for a spear these days. Around you, others do the same. This isn't a raid, not yet. No war cries, no torches, just shapes at the edge of the world. Strangers on the ridgeline, still as trees, but somehow more unsettling. Ashra climbs the lookout rock with two of the elders. They peer toward the hills. You can't see much, just movement. Maybe 5 or 6 figures. Not close, not far. The same ones, probably, who watched before. The boy who disappeared for a night swears it's them. Same posture, same way they didn't blink. A meeting is called. Quick. Blunt. That half of the council wants to send scouts to confront them. The other half says, leave them alone. They haven't attacked. They haven't approached. Maybe they're like wild dogs. Dangerous if provoked. Harmless if ignored. But fear doesn't wait for a consensus. That night, a guard is posted at each corner of the settlement, and a new set of rules is etched into a slab of discarded tile. No one leaves the village alone. No open fires after sunset. Speak of them only when needed. Still, nobody can ignore them. Every field run, every trip to the stream, Every goat herding round has people glancing over shoulders, scanning the hills. You can feel your muscles staying tense longer each day. You start dreaming of eyes in the dark, of watchers with blank faces and long spears. You wake with dirt under your fingernails and no idea how it got there. You ask Ashra one evening, in a moment between guard shifts, what she thinks they want. She's quiet for a long time before she says, "Same thing we all want. Food, shelter, some sense that the gods haven't completely turned their backs." Then she adds softer. The question is whether they'll ask or take. Here's your historical anchor. This wasn't a time of national borders and tidy invasions. In the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, groups migrated across landscapes without maps, looking for fertile land, safe havens, or simply less scorched earth. That made them and us fluid. Settled towns often found themselves facing waves of displaced people. Sometimes they welcomed them, sometimes they fought. Sometimes the difference between a guest and a raider came down to how hungry the visitor was. And for a quirky twist, some ruins from this period show walls built hastily, at odd angles, using whatever was on hand. Old temple stones, chunks of collapsed homes, even grave markers. One site had a fortification wall built directly through an abandoned palace's courtyard. That's the kind of aesthetic desperation you're starting to understand. Your own wall now includes a column that once supported a statue of a sun god. He's face down in the dirt, hasn't complained. Meanwhile, scholars are still debating whether these mysterious hill people or sea peoples were truly outsiders, or if some were just dislocated locals, people who lost their towns and wandered until they were feared by the ones who stayed put. Some archaeologists point out that the same weapons, pottery styles, and even burial practices show up across these shifting populations. The lines between cultures blurred under pressure. When everything burns, even your enemies start to look familiar. Back in your village, the mood shifts from fear to fixation. Children start drawing shapes in the dust, figures with long limbs and wide eyes, always watching. A little girl says she dreamed of one standing at her window, humming. A trader from the next valley tells a tale of a group that once lit fires on the ridges, not to signal war, but to mark a boundary. They only attack if you cross it, he says, but no one knows where it is. That sets off another round of debates. Should you send an offering? Food, tools, a woven cloth? A peace gift like the old days when towns would send barley and songbirds to one another before meetings? Some think it's wise, others call it weakness. You've seen enough desperation to know both sides have a point. In the end, it's Ashra who acts. Without warning anyone, she walks to the edge of the village with a small basket. Inside are dried figs, a sealed jug of water, and a single shell, polished and bright. She places it on a stone where the path narrows and leaves it there, then walks back in silence. You expect mockery, accusations, but no one says anything, not because they agree necessarily, but because nobody has a better idea. For 2 nights nothing happens, the basket sits untouched. Then, on the 3rd morning, it's gone, not scattered, not looted, just gone, neatly. The jug taken, the shell left behind. You find it that afternoon, placed carefully into the centre of the courtyard. Clean, untouched, a silent answer. Nobody speaks for a long time. That night, the wind is gentle, someone plays a simple tune on a reed flute. The guards still take their shifts, but their stances are looser now, more relaxed. You sleep without the knife under your pillow. The strangers are still out there. You don't know what they want, or how long this quiet will last. But for now, the fear is no longer sharp, just a dull ache, something you can live with. You hold the shell in your palm and feel its spiral ridges, delicate, precise, improbably whole. It's not peace, but it's not war either. And in a world like this, that's a beginning. It's surprising how quickly strange things become normal. You stop jumping at shadows. You stop flinching every time the goats look toward the hills. The shell, still sitting on the council's stone table, becomes a sort of icon. Not sacred, not exactly, but important. People touch it as they pass, some gently, some with a kind of reverence. A few rub their thumb along its ridges before speaking at meetings. It's never spoken of as a symbol, but everyone treats it like one. Even the children stop drawing watches in the dust and start sketching spirals instead. The days return to something like rhythm. Fields are planted again, early barley, beans, a few bitter herbs that somehow thrive in terrible soil. The composting pit smells like 1,000 sins, but works. The new grain-drying shed you helped build stands solid through the first real windstorm of the season. You catch your reflection in a puddle one morning and barely recognise yourself. Leaner, yes, and your hair longer than it's ever been. But there's something else. Something settled behind your eyes. Ashra, as always, is everywhere and nowhere. She moves through the village like a wisp of smoke, never shouting, never demanding, but somehow always getting things done. You still don't know where she came from, but by now it barely matters. She's part of the fabric, a woman who knows too much about forgotten palace rituals and the correct order of planting root vegetables. You've stopped asking questions. One night, during a shared meal of roasted roots and watered-down lentil mash, someone brings out an instrument. A lyre, battered but intact, missing one string. No one admits to owning it. No one claims to know where it came from. It simply appears as if summoned by the firelight. And when the man who picks it up begins to play, everyone goes quiet. The tune is ancient. You know it in your bones, not from hearing it before, but from something deeper. Something that existed when cities still stood tall and kings still wore gold bands around their arms. It's a song of longing, of memory, of something lost and never returned. People hum along, some cry, a few sit staring into the flames like they're looking through time itself. That night, your dreams are full of voices, sing in languages you don't understand. In one dream, the palace is whole again, and you walk its halls as if you never left. In another, the fields stretch forever, but every plant has a face, and all of them are whispering your name. When you wake, your sister is already at the fire, turning ash into soap. She hums the tune from the night before without realising it. The next few days bring strange visitors. Not strangers exactly, but there's traders, or what passes for traders now. 2 men and a woman with sun-cracked skin and carts made from scavenged chariot wheels arrive from the south, offering woven belts, fish hooks carved from bone, and a dozen vials of crushed purple dye. Real dye. Not clay-stained water, but the kind that used to colour royal robes. You trade a chipped blade and a week's worth of dried peas for 1 vial. You don't know why, it's not practical, but you tuck it into your mat at night like a charm. The traders bring news too. Cities further inland have fallen silent. One was taken by fire, maybe from raiders, maybe from within, one simply emptied out. No bodies, no signs of struggle, the man says, poking the fire. Just meals left uneaten, tools still hanging on the walls, like they walked out mid-sentence. They also say something stranger. A coastal settlement has begun building ships again. Not rafts, not fishing canoes, real ships, with tall sails and carved prows. They've started reaching out to other survivors, establishing new routes. Not trade, not yet, but contact, communication. It sounds impossible, and yet, as they say it, something inside you lights up. Here's your historical anchor. During the immediate centuries after the Bronze Age collapse, many coastal cities did re-emerge as hubs of trade and communication. Phoenicia, for example, rose to prominence in the ashes, eventually becoming one of the most influential maritime cultures of the early Iron Age. They built ships, spread alphabetic writing, and linked fractured regions with new trade routes. The collapse didn't erase connectivity forever, it just paused it, until someone decided to build again. And here's a quirky gem for you. Some of those early post-collapse sailors reportedly used old palace doors as ship parts, repurposed, reshaped and set to sea. In a literal sense, they were sailing on the ruins of the old world. You'd laugh if it didn't hit so close to home. The scholarly argument still lingers. Of course, some say rebuilding began almost immediately in pockets and bursts. Others argue it took generations that trauma soaked into the soil, so deeply it took 100 years to shake it off. There's truth in both. Recovery isn't a line, it's a loop. Forward, backward, forward again. In your village, change starts with something small, a message. One of the southern traders offers to take a clay tablet to the coast. Just a simple one, sun-dried, etched with crude pictograms and your village's spiral symbol. It's not a letter. It's more like a greeting, a signal that you're still here. Ashra writes it herself, kneeling beside the firelight. She draws a crude map of the river bend, marks the village with a dot and adds 3 short lines. We live, we trade, we remember. The trader tucks it into a pouch of wool and disappears over the hill. Weeks pass. In that time, the watchers on the ridge stop appearing. Not because they've gone, you think, but because they've moved on. Or maybe they've decided you're not prey. Or maybe the offering and the shell and the spiral have worked in ways you'll never quite understand. You spend your days gathering kindling, reinforcing the council hut, mending your mother's sandals. But always, your eyes flick to the horizon, waiting. And one day, just as the sun sinks orange into the western sea, a figure arrives. A child no more than 10, barefoot and wild-haired, carrying a pouch. He says nothing, just hands it to you and vanishes into the dark. Inside, a folded strip of bark, tied with red thread. Unwrap it, and there it is, a spiral. Drawn in purple dye. You hold the strip of bark in your hand like it's made of gold. It isn't, of course, it's dry and a little cracked, and the spiral drawn in purple dye is already beginning to fade at the edges. But to you, and to the others who crowd around to see, it might as well be a royal seal, from the days when kings still ruled, and ships brought copper in by the ton. The whole village gathers in the courtyard, leaning in close, mouths half open, as if the bark might speak. No one does speak at first, not even Ashra. Everyone just stares. A spiral, like the one in your village, but drawn by someone else, somewhere else. Ashra is the first to break the silence. She nods slowly, turns the bark over once in her hand, then says, almost too quietly to hear, "They heard us." She doesn't smile, not exactly, but the lines around her eyes soften. Someone starts laughing. Another follows. Not derisive laughter, just disbelief, nervous and giddy and full of something you haven't tasted in a while. Possibility. You all look around at one another, like you've just remembered you're not the last people left in the world. The next morning, the council gathers under the shade of the fig tree, the bark spiral laid carefully on a flat stone in the centre. The message is simple. Someone out there is alive. Someone heard your call and answered. That changes everything. A plan begins to form, rough, ambitious, almost ridiculous in scope. A second message carried by foot, not by trader. You'll send one of your own, not just to deliver news, but to see, to walk the roads again, or what's left of them. To find these others who still remember how to draw spirals. You don't even wait for the vote. You stand and offer to go. Your mother doesn't object. That surprises you. She just places a rough-woven bag in your hands and says, "If you don't come back, I'll assume you found something better." Then she hugs you, the kind of hug that presses your bones together. Ashra hands you a second bark scroll marked with symbols of your village, fields, fish, fire, and the spiral. She says nothing when she gives it to you, just looks you in the eye. You think you see pride, or maybe sorrow. You leave at dawn. Just you, a sling, a no, 2 days' food, and the feeling that you're part of something bigger than your own survival for the first time since the palace burned. The road, if you can even call it that, is more suggestion than path. You follow old markers when you can, using the river as your guide, but most of this way is just instinct and memory. You pass crumbled watchtowers and stretches of broken walls so covered in moss they look like natural rock. You sleep under fallen fig trees. You dream of cities still alive. By the third day you find signs, fresh footprints near a new spring, a snare trap left in a grove, bits of charcoal where a fire once burned. You follow carefully. You don't want to be seen as a threat. You practice saying hello in 3 different languages just in case. And then, at dusk on the 4th day, you see it. A settlement. Not large, maybe 20 homes if you can call them that, but with smoke rising from 3 hearths and the unmistakable sound of laughter drifting through the olive trees. There's music too. A drum maybe. Something rhythmic and slow. You step forward cautiously, raising your hands, bark scroll held high. Someone spots you and calls out, sharp and fast. You freeze. A small group approaches, 4 figures, one with a staff, one with a woven belt that marks them as a leader of some kind. You drop to your knees and place the scroll on the ground between you. One of them steps forward. A woman, tall, her face weathered but kind. She picks up the scroll, opens it, and looks at the markings. Then slowly, she unfastens a pendant from around her neck. A spiral carved in dark wood. She holds it up, nods once, and gestures for you to follow. You're led into the heart of the village, where the people are already gathering, whispering, watching. A boy offers you water. A man slaps your back like you're a long-lost cousin. The woman who met you by the gate invites you to sit beside the fire. They ask questions. Where you came from, who you speak for, what your spiral means. You answer as best you can. You tell them about Ashra, about the watchers in the hills, about the goat that drowned in the storm. You tell them your village remembers. In return, they tell you their story. They came from inland, once part of a city swallowed by drought. They fled when the wells dried up, lost half their number to raiders, but here, by the coast, the soil holds just enough water. The fish are small but abundant, and just last month a different village made contact from across the ridge. They are drawing spirals too. You feel the air shift, the fire crackle louder. It's happening. Here's your historical anchor. In the aftermath of the collapse, people didn't just sit in ruins and wait for death. They migrated, settled, connected. Small networks of trade and communication began to grow, first through shared symbols and later through language. The spiral is just a stand-in. For you, for them, for something ancient and essential. A way to say, we're here, we remember, we can begin again. And for your quirky fact, archaeologists have found evidence of shared motifs, spirals, zigzags, sunbursts, etched into pottery and tools across different post-collapse cultures, even ones separated by hundreds of miles. Some argue it was a proto-language. Others think it was just fashion. Either way, people were talking even without words. As for the scholars, the debate goes on. Did these symbols represent trade leagues, family alliances, cults? Or were they nothing more than the doodles of a world trying to make sense of its ruins? There's never just one answer, but you're part of that question now. You sleep that night under a new roof beside people who were strangers 12 hours ago. One gives you a blanket, another offers a song. You're not part of their family, but you might be part of something else, something spiralling outward. You stay for 3 days. The coastal settlement is modest but alive, the kind of place where every tool is used past the point of breaking, and every child knows 3 ways to catch a crab before breakfast. Their homes are low, built into the curve of the land, some part stone, most part mud and driftwood, and the roofs are stitched together with woven seagrass that whistles when the wind comes in hard off the water. It's quiet, but not dead quiet, just focused. The kind of quiet a community earns through practice, not fear. They call themselves the Aru, a name you've never heard before, though the older woman who speaks for them, Eliat, she tells you, says it goes back far beyond famine, which you guess is their way of saying no one remembers where it started. You like that. A people who don't need to explain themselves, only prove they're still here. On your second night, they host a gathering in your honour. Not a feast, that word doesn't mean what it used to, but a shared meal around a long fire pit, everyone contributing what they can. A boy roasts fish on sharpened driftwood. A girl with hair braided in copper wire passes around a thick paste made from ground seaweed and dried figs. It's better than it sounds. Someone offers fermented pine resin in a hollowed shell, and even though it tastes like wet smoke, you accept it with both hands. When the eating slows, the stories start. You learn about the time a storm washed up a boat with no people, only dried fruit and a sealed jar of honey. Still good. You learn that one of the elders once spoke with a man from across the sea who wore sandals made of shell and carried a wooden flute shaped like a bird. You learn that the Aru believe fire is a spirit, not a tool, and must be sung to before it's lit or it won't listen. You nod along, open-minded but sceptical, until you watch someone hum a lullaby to a spark and see it catch like it understood. You share your own stories too. You tell them about Ashra, about the council under the fig tree, about the watchers on the hill and the shell left in reply. You talk about your sister's bark sandals and the communal grain shed and the spiral scratched into every new piece of pottery like a brand, a memory, a claim. They listen carefully, especially to the part about the other village that sent the bark spiral in return. That night, after most people drift off to sleep, Eliat takes you to a small shrine near the water. It's just a half circle of standing stones, a few shells placed at the base, and a coil of dried grass shaped into, you guessed it, a spiral. She lights a taper, lets the flame catch and says, "We thought we were the only ones." You tell her you thought the same. Here's your historical fact. After the collapse, cultural identity didn't vanish. It just went underground. Localized religions, rituals and oral traditions continued, often blending old beliefs with new needs. Archaeological finds in early Iron Age settlements show shrines built from the broken remains of former temples, statues missing arms, altars relocated to courtyards. The sacred became personal. The monumental became portable. And for a strange, possibly accidental detail, in one coastal ruin, a set of ceremonial objects was found buried beneath a hearth. Beads, carved shells, and a piece of broken tablet with a child's handprint pressed into the clay. Was it an offering, a burial, a game? No one can say for sure, but something sacred was happening even if the form had changed. Scholars still debate how much continuity existed between the Bronze Age and what followed. Some argue for a hard reset, a cultural amnesia where nothing was passed down. Others see threads connecting the old to the new, a symbol here, a melody there, a word that survived because someone whispered it to their child by firelight. Your experience leans toward the latter. Survival hasn't erased memory, it's just forced it into different shapes. By your third day, you know what you have to do. You ask for permission to carve your village's spiral into the Aru's message stone, the standing slab near their meeting hut. Elliot nods without hesitation. Make it deep, she says. Let the wind find it. You use a sharpened shard of bronze. Takes the better part of an afternoon. When it's done, your hands ache and your knuckles are raw. But the mark is clear. Your village, your people, your presence. It's here now, even when you're gone. Before you leave, Elliot gives you a gift. A coil of braided seagrass tied at the centre with purple thread. She calls it a waymarker. It's not for you, she says. It's for the next one who finds you, so that they know you've already found us. You start your journey back with a full pouch and a full heart. The land looks different now. Not softer, not safer, but possible. You notice things you missed before. A half-collapsed statue lying on its side in the riverbed, moss growing in its open mouth, a tree etched with carvings you can't read. Someone was here, maybe still is. You rest at the spring with the footprints and leave a shell on a flat stone. Not a message exactly, just a hello. When you reach the village, the fields are green, not lush, but alive. The wall still stands. The goats are loud. You walk into the courtyard just as the council is meeting and hold up the waymarker without a word. Ashra sees it first, and for the first time since the palace burned, she smiles without restraint. That night the village throws its own kind of gathering. Root stew, laughter, the usual fermented horror beverage. Your sister dances barefoot on the packed dirt while someone taps rhythm on a water jug. You sit beside the fire feeling the weight of the journey settle into your spine and your chest, and it doesn't feel like a burden, it feels like a beginning. Later you tie the waymarker to the council hut's beam just beneath the spiral painted there weeks ago. It sways gently in the breeze. You fall asleep listening to the wind whistle through it, almost like a voice, saying keep going. The wind has changed. It carries salt now, even this far inland, as if the sea is breathing deeper, exhaling something ancient and new. You notice it in the mornings, when the mist rolls in thicker and lingers longer. The goats sneeze. The old men mutter about coastal spirits, as if air itself is wandering out of bounds. But you know what it really means. The ocean is alive again. Trade might not be thriving, but it's twitching in its sleep. Somewhere sails are catching wind. Your spiral has started spreading, not just etched into clay jars or carved into beams, but in how people talk. They mention other villages now, places they've never seen but speak of like distant cousins. The Eru, the river folk, the reed dwellers to the north who sing to their nets before casting them. All people you haven't met, but whose spirals you've heard about through the scattered words of travellers and traders, and the boy who swears he saw a boat bigger than a house floating offshore with a fire built right on its deck. At first you think he's exaggerating. Children often do. But when the next trader arrives, this one from far up the coast, he confirms the story. Sort of. The boat is real, he says, and it's not alone. There are 3 now. Not warships, not palatial crafts either. Something new, sloped hulls, stripped down sails, made from a patchwork of old wood and new ambition, and they're building more. That gets everyone talking. By the next morning, the village council meets to discuss the unthinkable. Building a boat of your own. Not a fishing canoe. A real vessel. One that could travel beyond the coastline and follow the spirals to wherever they lead. Not for trade. Not yet. Just to see. To reconnect, to remember how. The idea is met with equal parts awe and panic. Boats are sacred to some, cursed to others. Your village hasn't built anything larger than a raft in years. There are no shipwrights here. No dry docks, no blueprints stored in palace archives. The last person who claimed to have sailed the open sea now wanders the fields talking to birds. But the idea sticks. Ashra, of course, supports it. She always leans toward forward motion. She doesn't speak at length. She never does, but she looks each council member in the eye and says, "We're not meant to be an island." Then she walks away, leaving the weight of her words behind like an anchor. And so it begins. The boat starts as a rumour, then a sketch, then a pile of logs stripped of bark and sorted by length. You help dig the trench where the frame will be shaped. It's hot, repetitive work, but you find a strange peace in it, like laying the bones of something not yet alive. One man, a former chariot builder with 2 fingers missing from an accident involving a lion and a very bad idea, becomes the lead craftsman. He speaks more to wood than to people. That seems to work just fine. As the hull takes shape, people start gathering around it in the evenings, not to work but to be near it. Children climb on it. Elders sit beside it with their evening mash, watching the curve of the spine rise inch by inch. A few carve tiny spirals into the planks as offerings. Someone ties a dried flower to the prow and calls it the Rememberer. The name sticks. Here's a historical anchor. Early Iron Age shipbuilding resurged slowly, often in isolated pockets. Phoenician innovations began to spread through the Mediterranean, while coastal cultures adapted their own older techniques to smaller, more flexible designs. These weren't grand merchant fleets, they were scouts, messengers, vessels of reconnection, communication before commerce. And for the quirky fact of the night, a shipwreck found off the coast of Turkey from this period included a mismatched set of oars, pieces from at least 3 different ship styles, and a cooking pot that predates the vessel by a century. The best theory? They scavenged, built from fragments, and took to the water with whatever floated. Frankenstein flotillas. And sometimes that was enough. Back in your village, the Rememberer becomes more than a project. It becomes a focal point. Arguments stop happening near it. Even rival families, those still bickering over the grain shares and goat paths, treat the space around it with quiet respect. Someone even starts sweeping the ground around it each morning, though no one admits to doing it. One day, a boy finds a shard of obsidian in the river mud. Not local, sharp and dark and beautiful. He gives it to you, you give it to Ashra. She ties it to a cord and hangs it from the boat's bow like an eye. At night, you dream of waves. Big ones, yes, but also still ones. Silver-grey waters with strange reflections, dreams of coasts where the sand is red and trees bend towards the sea as if in prayer. You don't know if these are memories of stories or visions of what's coming. The elders call a meeting, not to argue the boat's worth. That ship, pun intended, has sailed. No, this meeting is to decide who goes with it when it launches. It won't hold many, maybe 5 or 6 at most, enough to scout, not to migrate. Ashra is chosen without contest. She doesn't flinch. Then the chariot builder, because no one else knows how to reinforce the joints. The others are debated, weighed carefully, based on skills, temperament and willingness. You're not chosen, and you're not upset, because someone has to stay behind and hold the thread. Keep the fire burning, keep the spiral growing in the soil. You've become the one who connects now, not the one who scouts. That realization surprises you. You didn't notice yourself becoming that person, but it fits. Ashra hands you a cloth-wrapped bundle before boarding. Inside is a bark scroll painted with a new spiral. It's not from her. It's meant for her to carry to the next village, but she wants you to have the duplicate. Just in case, she says. You don't ask in case of what. You watch them push the Rememberer down its clay and reed ramp into the river, then into the open sea. It bobs like a heartbeat, then floats true. The wind catches, the sail rises, and just like that, they're gone. Not forever, just forward. You stay standing long after the horizon has swallowed them, and you realise this is what survival feels like now. Not hiding, not hoarding, reaching. The days after the boat's departure feel slower. Not empty, not bleak. Just quieter, like the air is holding its breath. You go back to your usual tasks, mending grain baskets, checking the drying racks for mould, walking the goats through the stony ridge paths, but your thoughts drift constantly to the horizon. You keep glancing toward the sea, half expecting to see a sail returning, or a fire signal blinking on a far-off cliff. Nothing yet, just waves. Without Ashra around, things shift. Not dramatically, she didn't rule, she influenced, but her absence creates a vacuum that pulls people's voices into the open. Debates are more frequent now. The council meets longer. Some want to build a second boat. Others say the first may never return and wood is too precious to waste. One man proposes sending scouts inland instead. The sea holds ghosts, he warns, but the hills hold opportunity. You're not sure what he means, but the word opportunity gets people's attention. That's when something strange happens. A man named Darrow starts gaining influence. He's a goat farmer by trade, or at least he was, and not one of the louder voices in the village until now, but he's clever, good with people, and better with food. He organises shared meals from the surplus lentils. He suggests rotating guard duty to give the old men a break. He fixes a section of wall no one else wanted to touch and never even mentions it afterward. He starts hosting gatherings in the evenings. Not official meetings, just quiet chats around his hearth, usually with stew simmering and plenty of strong drink passed around. People talk, ideas spread, not in loud, aggressive ways, just in gentle, persistent waves. Darrow doesn't ask for power. He doesn't demand anything, but you can feel him drawing people in. One night he suggests organising food rations differently. Fairer, he says, simpler. His way would mean no more long council arguments over who gets what. People like the sound of that. Less fuss, less friction. You're wary, but you also remember hunger. And Darrow's way means you don't go to sleep with your stomach gnawing your ribs. Soon people start calling him the Goat King, half joking, half not. He laughs when he hears it, holds up a ladle like a sceptre, and declares the soup blessed by the spirits of the flock. Ugh! Everyone laughs, it's harmless, it feels good to laugh again. But something shifts in his tone the next week. You notice it when he interrupts a council member mid-sentence with a simple hand gesture, and they stop talking, no protest, just silence. The way people used to fall silent for scribes and priests. The way they used to when kings still sat on elevated thrones. Darrow starts asking questions like, what if we had a single voice for decisions? And, isn't one clear leader safer than a dozen bickering ones? It's always posed as a hypothetical, a suggestion, a way to make things easier. But the air around him is changing. He's no longer just helpful. He's becoming something else. You try to talk to your mother about it. She listens quietly, stirs her pot and says, people get used to being led, especially after being lost. You keep thinking about that. Here's your historical anchor. After the Bronze Age collapse, with palace systems dismantled and central authority shattered, power didn't vanish. It simply reformed. Across the Near East and Mediterranean, new local leaders emerged, often charismatic figures who filled the void left by kings. They weren't always noble or hereditary rulers. Sometimes they were warlords, sometimes priests, sometimes, like Darrow, just a person who fed people when they were hungry. And your quirky fact? In one early Iron Age village site, archaeologists discovered a small mud brick throne tucked into a communal space, too low and simple to belong to a king, but elevated just enough to suggest someone sat there to speak regularly. Not a monarch, more like a little king, the kind you get when people aren't ready for empires but aren't done with hierarchy either. The scholarly debate still simmers. Was this a return to tribal leadership, proto-democracy with strong personalities, or the seeds of new monarchies waiting to sprout? You're not here to solve it. You're just watching it happen in real time. One evening, Darrow calls for a meeting, but not under the fig tree. He invites everyone to his home. The tree's shade is good for summer, he says, but it's too exposed for important choices. You show up late, on purpose. You sit near the back. He talks about structure, about strength, about how one hand can hold the village tighter than many. He doesn't say he should be that hand. He doesn't need to. By the end, people are nodding. Not all, but enough. He calls for a vote. No pottery shards this time, just voices. Most say yes. The next morning, a woven mat is laid in front of Darrow's home. A man stands there all day waiting to pass messages. People begin calling it the seat. No one calls Darrow a king, not officially, but no one stops him from acting like one either. You talk to the council about it quietly. A few agree, a few roll their eyes. One shrugs and says, maybe it's time someone made decisions without a vote. We're too scattered. You think about Ashra, so about how she moved like a ghost through the village, never sitting, never ordering, just guiding. And you think about Darrow sitting proudly by his fire, smiling like the world already belongs to him. You're not sure what worries you more, his rise, or how comfortable it feels. Here's what no one tells you about survival. Sometimes, when the chaos fades, the danger doesn't disappear. It just puts on a friendlier face. One with warm stew and a steady hand. That night, you dream of the sea again. But this time the boat is sailing back toward you, and someone else is steering. 3 days after the first whispers of Daro's new title begin to settle into place, never spoken outright but always hovering, you hear a sound you haven't heard in weeks, a shout from the lookout rock. Not the panicked kind, the surprised, scrambling down the slope kind. You rush up the path before your mind has time to guess, and there it is, a sail. Thin, dark, and barely visible through the salt haze, but real. The Rememberer is returning. By the time it reaches the river mouth, the entire village is waiting on the shore. Some of the children dance with palm fronds. A few of the elders weep openly. You stand near the front, trying not to hold your breath. The boat slides in slowly, not as graceful as when it left, its hull darkened with water wear and the sail patched in 2 places. But it floats true. Someone throws a rope. Hands reach out, feet splash into the shallows, and then Ashra is stepping onto land again. She looks thinner, sun-darkened, but solid, whole. The others follow, tired, hungry, but grinning, moaning. No casualties, no losses, just stories. They bring gifts, not gold, not copper, no exotic spices or glass beads, but information, bark scrolls, carved tablets, songs, and ideas. Ashra carries a clay disc, flat and blackened, with a spiral on one side and a sunburst on the other. She holds it up like a priest with a relic and says, "There are more of us." They had sailed south, hugging the coast, stopping where fires burned at night. At each place they found settlements like your own, wounded but thing. Some spoke languages they barely recognized. Others wore talismans with familiar shapes. One group had never stopped worshipping the same river goddess your village abandoned years ago. Another used ash as currency, but every single one had heard of the spirals. Some even wore them. The spiral, it turns out, is more than just your mark. It's become a signal, a whisper across the sea and the hills, a way of saying we are not gone. Ashra says they're building a network. Rudimentary, fragile but real. Villages sending messengers to each other, marking paths with carved symbols, storing grain for trade. Not just survival. A few have begun relearning bronze smithing. One place even found an old store of tin tucked deep inside a collapsed mine. She pauses when she says that, looks out over the crowd, measuring something. Then she says, "They've started forging again." A ripple moves through the group. Not everyone cheers, not everyone understands, but those who do look at each other with wide eyes. You think back to the last time you saw new bronze. Not just scavenged, not just reshaped, newly poured. It's been years, longer. Your hands remember the feel of it, even if your eyes haven't seen it in so long. That weight, that balance, the promise of precision and permanence. Not stone, not bone, bronze, and here's your historical fact. During the Bronze Age collapse, metal production almost completely halted in some regions, but pockets of knowledge survived, and over time as stability returned, so did smithing. Tin became rare but not extinct. Some old routes reopened, some new ones were formed, and with them came the return of tools that didn't splinter, weapons that could hold an edge, and hinges that didn't creak. And here's something wonderfully odd. One early post-collapse site contains a bronze dagger buried with a child, its blade engraved with a spiral design nearly identical to one found hundreds of miles away. Scholars can't explain the connection. Some think it was traded across dozens of villages. Others suggest it was made by a single travelling smith, passing from place to place like a wandering myth. Speaking of myths, that's what Ashra tells next. She speaks of a woman on the coast who calls herself the Storm Daughter. No one knows her real name. She wears a crown made of fish bones and bronze nails and claims to speak for the sea. Some say she's mad. Others say she calmed a storm just by singing. Ashra doesn't say whether she believes it, just that the world is stitching together new gods from old scraps, and that might be the most important thing she brought back. Not the tools, not the stories, not even the plans for a second boat, drawn carefully in charcoal on folded bark, but the feeling that something is growing again, slowly, strangely, but undeniably. Of course not everyone's thrilled. Dara doesn't speak during the welcome. He stands near the back, arms folded, smiling just enough to be polite, but you see the tension in his jaw. The way he watches Ashra, not like a returning hero, but like a variable in a carefully balanced system. The next day he calls a meeting, not by the tree, by his hearth. You go, but only to listen. He says things like, "It's good to explore, but we can't lose focus," and "A village needs a clear voice, not noise from every coast." He never names Ashra, but everyone knows. He frames it all as concern, as pragmatism, as care. Ashra doesn't attend the meeting. Instead, she's in the courtyard, drawing symbols on clay tiles with your sister and to one of the returning sailors. Spiral, sunburst, wave, tree, you recognise them now. These are no longer just decorations. They're identifiers, a kind of alphabet. A new language being born out of need, not decree. That night you sit beside Ashra near the fire. She hands you a tile with a spiral inside a sunburst. For the archive, she says. You glance at the fire, then at the stars. They feel closer tonight, like the sky's leaning in. You ask her quietly, "Do you think we'll ever rebuild what we lost?" She thinks for a moment, then says, "No, but maybe something better." You believe her. You fall asleep with the tile still in your hand, the spiral edge pressing gently into your palm like a brand. And in your dream, a smith walks through a ruined city, leaving a trail of fire behind her. It starts with a sound, deep, hollow, and rhythmic. Not a drum, not footsteps, something heavier. You're pulling weeds from between the courtyard stones when you hear it. Thud. Thud. Pause. Thud. You freeze, squint toward the path that leads to the ruined edge of the old palace district and wait. The sound doesn't repeat, but others hear it too. Heads turn, tools are set down, children are gathered indoors by nervous hands. No one speaks, but everyone is thinking the same thing. Not another raid. Please, not again. But it's not raiders this time. It's a cart. A massive lopsided wooden cart with a wobbling wheel and 2 oxen so thin you can see every rib. Behind it walks a man in a patched cloak, guiding the animals with a stick and stopping often to adjust the uneven load. Behind him, a woman, younger. Carrying something wrapped in leather on her back, she walks with a limp. And then the cargo itself, salvaged stone blocks, broken tiles, baskets of ash and bone. At first, no one understands what they're seeing, until the woman steps forward and says calmly, "We're rebuilding the temple. Not here," she adds, "not in your village. In hers, far west, in the mountains, near the sea. But they're passing through and need help, food, shelter, directions, and maybe a few hands." The idea hits your village like a wave. A temple, not a shrine, not a prayer hut. A full-blown structure with walls and rituals and, presumably, somewhere to sit and wonder whether the gods are still watching. You haven't heard that word spoken without irony in years. Ashra greets them first. She listens, nods, asks no hard questions. Then she invites them to eat and rest. That evening, the woman with the limp speaks more. Her name is Nisa. Her companion is her uncle, though he barely speaks, and may not understand most of what's going on. She says her village, what's left of it, believes it's time to call the gods back. "They never left," someone says from the circle. Nissa shrugs. "Maybe. But we stopped talking." There's silence after that. The kind that doesn't want to be interrupted. You feel it too, the tug of something old. Not the high temples of the old kings, bloated with tribute and guarded by men in gold skirts, but the raw version. Fire and stone, singing and silence, a space between chaos and peace. The next day, Dara calls another gathering. He doesn't criticize the idea outright. He even calls it inspiring. But then he adds that what villagers need now isn't altars. It's walls, food, structure. The gods, he says with a thin smile, had their chance. Some agree. They nod, arms folded, eyes tight. Faith didn't save anyone when the palaces fell. Temples burned just like houses. Priests fled faster than warriors. Who needs a god that can't keep the roof from falling? But others are stirred, especially the young. They don't remember the temples, they remember stories of them. They remember lullabies about sky gods and tree spirits, and the moon as a wandering grandmother. They've grown up without rituals, without meaning beyond the dirt and the fire. The idea of building a place for something more, it catches light in their minds. And so a decision is made, not by decree, but by motion. Nisa and her uncle will stay for a while, help with repairs in exchange for food, and then continue west with any volunteers willing to come. Not to serve, she clarifies, to build, together. You're one of the ones who says yes, not because you believe the gods are waiting, but because something inside you says places matter. That in all this rebuilding, boats, fields, stories, something sacred is missing. Not supernatural, just sacred. The kind of sacred that happens when people agree to treat something as more than functional. Here's your historical fact. After the collapse, temples didn't disappear. They changed. Where once they had been towering institutions tied to kings and state cults, they became smaller, local, and deeply personal. Excavations of post-collapse sites reveal sanctuaries built from scavenged materials, mud brick altars, open-air circles of stone, reused figurines buried under hearths. Not abandoned beliefs, just adapted ones. And your fringe fact? In one site, a broken statue of a lion-headed god was found deliberately reassembled, head placed on a mismatched torso, one arm replaced with a wooden stick, and a necklace of shell fragments draped around its neck. No clear purpose, no inscription, but someone wanted it whole again. Scholars are split, but as usual. Some say post-collapse spirituality was a desperate grasp at control. Others argue it was a new kind of faith built from the ground up, intimate, fragmented, but resilient. You don't know which is true, you just know that the idea of a place to gather and remember feels right. You travel with Nessa's group for 5 days. You learn she used to be a singer, that her limp came from a collapsed wall, that her uncle was once a stonecutter in a palace that no longer has a name, that she dreams of a temple with no statues, just symbols and open air. When you arrive, it's more ruins than village. Slope with broken walls, a few homes clinging to the ridge, goats that seem barely attached to the earth. But the clearing is there, a circle of blackened stones, a weathered pillar, a crack in the ground where water trickles up even during drought, the beginnings of something. You help clear rubble. You help lift stones. You place spirals in the corners, not as decoration but as anchors. And one evening, as dusk spreads blue across the sky, you sit beside the new altar, a flat rock warmed by the sun, and close your eyes. You don't pray, but you feel something. Memory, maybe, or potential. And when you return to your village weeks later, covered in dust and calluses, your mother cups your face like she's inspecting a statue for cracks and says, "You look so taller." You're not, but you are different. You know what a sacred space feels like now, and you'll never unfeel it. The temple stays with you long after you leave it behind. You can still feel the stone slab under your palms, still hear the creak of ropes hauling up scavenged beams, still smell the mix of sweat and crushed sage leaves burned during that first simple ritual. No elaborate chanting, no blood or fire. Just people sitting in a circle, touching the earth, and remembering things that had no names anymore. You return to your village changed, not in a way that draws stares or starts gossip, but in a quieter, deeper way. You walk a little slower. You notice more, like the way the shadows gather under the fig tree before sunset, or how the sound of the reed flute carries further at night now that the air's grown crisper. There's an ache in the ground lately, like it's waiting for something. The sky's lower, more crowded with stars, and the wind smells like smoke and salt and something older than both. Ashra notices, of course. She always does. She touches your shoulder one evening and asks nothing at all. Just waits, so you tell her. About the circle, the altar, the moment when everything felt stitched together again for just one breath. You don't tell her about the dream you had while sleeping next to the spring. That dream of a figure with a spiral face, arms made of bronze, standing in the ruins of a city with no roofs. You're not ready to speak that one aloud. Not yet. She nods like she's heard a version of it before. Then, with no transition, she says, "We've had tremors again." Your stomach drops. You remember the last time, 3 years ago. The earth shuddered so hard the river changed direction and a section of the wall collapsed in a single breath. People screamed, goats vanished, and your neighbour's well cracked down the middle. Aftershocks rippled through the week that followed. It was like being on the back of a beast that hadn't realised it was dying yet. This time it's subtler. A small shift. Just enough to knock a few baskets off their hooks. But there's something under it. A tension that's not just in the ground, but in the people. The goats are anxious again. Birds fly in strange patterns, and the old man who sleeps near the ruined temple stone keeps waking up screaming about the sea pulling the sky down. The council meets to discuss it. Darrow sits at the centre now. Not quite a throne, not quite just a seat. His influences are hardened. Where he once used stew and laughter, he now uses systems. Ration charts, patrol schedules, construction quotas. Efficient, tidy, but rigid. The spiral tiles are no longer updated weekly. They've been replaced with bark notices marked with lines and symbols only Darrow's scribes fully understand. You speak up, carefully, about the tremors. Suggest moving a few sleeping spaces farther from the cliff edge. Suggest checking the cistern stones for cracks. Darrow listens, nods once, and then moves on. It's not refusal, but it's not attention either. After the meeting, Ashra leans in and whispers, he's becoming an old kind of leader. The kind who forgets what the ground can do. She's right, because while everyone's focused on raids, grain and trade routes, no one wants to talk about the land itself shifting beneath them. No one wants to remember that collapse doesn't only come from men with spears. Sometimes it comes from the earth yawning open under your feet. Here's your historical fact. Earthquakes were a significant and often underestimated part of the Bronze Age collapse. Archaeological evidence across the eastern Mediterranean, from Troy to Mycenae, shows signs of seismic destruction layered with fire and abandonment. Some believe a regional earthquake storm contributed to the unravelling of cities, making already vulnerable systems collapse faster. And your fringe theory? A few researchers suggest that prolonged drought and seismic activity may have combined, cracking cisterns, rerouting rivers, salting once fertile fields through sudden flooding. Nature didn't just turn its back, it shoved. Among scholars, the debate remains, was nature the killer, or just the final push? Did the gods leave first, or did people stop listening when the ground stopped holding still? Back in the village, signs accumulate. A crack appears along the western wall, small but growing. The well near the animal pen turns brackish. Someone finds a fish in the field, not near the stream, in the field. No explanation, just a twitching silver body among the barley shoots. Your sister begins having dreams. She says she sees water rising, but not from the sea, from below, through the cracks, through the grain jars, through her bed. She starts sleeping on the roof. Your mother doesn't argue. You speak with Ashra again. Suggest preparing an evacuation plan. She agrees, but says you must do it quietly. Darrow would see it as panic, or worse, insubordination. So you gather a few others. The old wall repair crew, the traders, a few mothers with strong arms and sharp eyes. Quietly you dig out the old maps, mark higher ground, locate spare food caches. You memorise the sound of the tremors, just in case it starts with sound. And one evening, as the fire burns low and the air smells too much like iron, you sit beside Ashra and you ask, what happens if the village breaks? She looks at you for a long time, then says, then we do what we've always done, and you nod. But deep down, something tells you this time might be different. Because this isn't just a village, this is a new world trying to stand on the bones of the old one. And the ground is tired of holding it all up. You sleep that night with your shoes beside your mat, just in case. And in your dream, the spiral turns not outward, but downward, into the dark. It starts, not with the ground shaking, but with your aunt standing in the middle of the courtyard holding a ledger made of bark and refusing to move. The sun is barely up. Oh, the light's pale and thin, filtering through a mist that clings low to the stones. Everyone else is still stumbling into their morning routines, stretching, mumbling, checking goats. But there she is, firm as a statue, ledger in one hand, chin lifted. She's not a tall woman, your aunt, not physically imposing, but there's something in the way she plants her feet, like the earth itself would hesitate before shifting beneath her. People begin to gather, quiet and curious, waiting for someone else to speak first. She changed the numbers, your aunt says, voice loud and clear. Everyone knows who she is. Darrow's new scribe, a young woman with quick hands and quicker eyes, has been handling ration allocation since last moon. It was supposed to be temporary, just until the elders recovered from the fever that swept through, but weeks passed and she kept her seat. Then the old charts disappeared, replaced with tight little rows of symbols and quiet revisions. No one was told, no one asked. Your aunt lifts the ledger. Look for yourself, the barley's going south, so is the fish. Our stores are half what they should be, and only the chosen few get full shares. Murmurs start, not angry yet, confused, disappointed, some just tired. No one wants another fight. But then Darrow arrives. He walks into the crowd slowly, calmly, not with fury, but with the sort of smooth confidence that makes you feel like you must be overreacting. He listens to your aunt without interrupting. He takes the ledger, flips through it like it's a bedtime story, and says, "There's been a mistake, a miscalculation." Your aunt doesn't flinch. "This isn't a mistake, it's a plan." Darrow's jaw tightens, his voice stays level. "We have too many mouths, we're preparing for the dry months, rationing's necessary." Someone calls out, Why not share the cuts equally? Daro's eyes flick to the speaker, an older man, one of the wall repair crew. A few heads nod. "'Cause," Daro says, "not everyone contributes equally." There it is, just 4 words, but they fracture the air like a hammer to ice. A ripple goes through the courtyard. You see it happen, people leaning back, expressions hardening, eyes narrowing as something they've avoided thinking about finally lands like a stone in the middle of the fire. Not everyone contributes equally, and so not everyone eats equally. And who decides what's equal? That night, the council meets, what's left of it anyway. 2 members don't show, one says he has a fever, the other no explanation. Daro sits where Ashura used to stand, the centre of the circle, the place reserved for rotating voices, not fixed ones. He listens, he nods in, he says all the right things, but he doesn't yield. "We need order," he says. "We can't afford soft decisions. You speak once, quietly. Fairness isn't softness." Daro smiles at you, and it's the kind of smile someone gives before stepping over a sleeping dog. The next morning your aunt takes control of the granary. Not a raid, not a mutiny, just a quiet refusal to let the gates open until someone else, anyone else, counts the sacks, and the village waits. Here's your historical fact. In many post-collapse societies, women often held primary roles in food distribution. As palace bureaucracies fell apart, the control of grain, who planted it, who stored it, who gave it out, shifted to whoever managed the hearths. In some regions, that meant women became the de facto power holders in matters of life and death. And your quirky twist? A recently excavated storage facility from the early Iron Age included several small clay figures buried near the threshold, each shaped like a seated woman holding a bowl. Were they guardians, offerings, warnings? No one knows. But the granary wasn't just a building, it was a threshold, and your village is now standing on one. Ashura returns to the circle only after being asked. She'd stayed quiet, letting others speak, watching the shifts like a woman watching a tide decide whether it's going to flood her garden. She doesn't yell, doesn't accuse, just asks a question. What happens when the one with the grain no longer listens to the ones with the soil? It's a soft question, but it lands hard, because the farmers, quiet until now, are starting to pull their weight in new ways. You've heard them muttering in the fields, saying maybe it's time to store grain elsewhere. Hidden caches, just in case, and some have already done it. You know, because one of them asks you to help dig. The next few days feel like walking a tightrope across a fire pit. No open rebellion, no outright tyranny, just 1,000 tiny decisions pulling people toward 2 different futures. One with a king made of practicality, one with a memory made of spirals. Your aunt keeps the granary keys. No one takes them from her. Daro doesn't try, not yet. He hosts another feast, barley mash and fish bones. He says it's tradition, that unity matters, that spirals are fine on pottery but not on policy. People smile and nod and don't say much. The fire burns too low, the music doesn't start, you leave early, find Ashura by the water's edge, where the river's thinner this time of year. She hands you a strip of bark, freshly inked with the new symbol. Not a spiral, something else. A sun over 3 lines. She says, it means harvest, in the old coastal tongue. You ask, why not use the spiral, she simmers, because it's growing into something else. That night your sister comes to you with news. The wall builders are splitting their work crews. Half will still reinforce the perimeter, the other half will start digging an underground storehouse. No one calls it rebellion, but everyone knows what it is. Your mother, silent for weeks, finally speaks over breakfast. Little kings rise fast. Then she adds, but they forget who holds the seeds. You remember the old temple, the cracked ground, the dreams of water rising. You watch the stars that night and see the same spiral forming overhead. Faint, slow, but turning. Not out of control, just away from one centre. Toward many. You spend the next week in the hills, not running, not hiding, just working with the wall crew's splinter group, the ones who have stopped answering directly to Daro and started answering to each other. You don't call it rebellion. No one does. That would be too heavy, too final. Instead, you call it the second granary project. You carry stones, you cut reed, you patch leaks. All the while, you watch the tree line and listen to the wind, which lately has begun to sound like distant voices arguing. The new cache is being built inside an old livestock shelter, long abandoned. The goats wouldn't even stay there anymore, claimed it stank of fire and snakes. The superstition is thick, but hunger beats fear, so you clear it out and start shaping the floor into a dry basin. Your aunt comes up from the village with a basket of dried figs and news that someone, probably one of Daro's scribes, has begun recording who attends which meetings, and how often. You pause mid-hall, mud on your knees, and try to imagine your name written down on a scrap of bark under the heading Suspected Non-Compliance. It's not hard. Back in the village, things grow sharper. Daro's voice grows colder in meetings. His speech is tighter. He no longer jokes. The smile is still there, but it doesn't reach his eyes. He now refers to himself as custodian, which no one remembers voting on. Ashra's presence, once a comfort, has turned into a kind of quiet resistance just by existing. She stands during every meeting. She won't sit while the structure around her shifts without consent. You're not sure which way things are moving anymore. Some days it feels like progress, other days like the same old collapse just dressed in new clothing. But here's the truth. Survival has made everyone good at pretending. That becomes especially clear one morning when a travelling smith arrives. He's older than the hills, wrapped in patched linen, and pulls a little cart with 2 wooden wheels that squeak like dying birds. He calls himself Harren Hammerborn, which makes some of the children laugh. But when he unwraps the cloth from his cart, everyone goes still. Iron, not bronze, not bone, not flint. Iron, not much, just a few rods, a chipped sickle, a short blade, but unmistakable, dark, heavy, silent, a different colour of future. You're close enough to see how crudely forged it is, wavy, uneven, full of veins like stone. But it's solid, and no one knows how he made it. Daro moves fast, offers shelter, food, his pick of sleeping spaces. Harren accepts, but warily. He's seen this before, you can tell. Places too eager to host often ask for things they don't deserve. You, naturally, are curious. You sit near the cart that night as the fire pops and Harren scrapes dried meat with the iron blade like it's just another tool. Eventually he starts talking. Says he learned the craft from a man in the north who claimed to get his ore from fallen stars. Not metaphor, Harren says with a wink. Real stars. The kind that burn the sky. You've heard this before, old myths about sky iron, about gods dropping weapons to earth during wars no one remembers. But Harren speaks like someone who's held it, hammered it, smelled its strange metallic stink as it cools. Here's your historical fact. Ironworking did begin to rise in the wake of the Bronze Age collapse, partly because tin, the rare ingredient in bronze, became harder to acquire. Iron, though more difficult to smelt, was more abundant. Early iron was often of poor quality, but it represented independence. Anyone with ore and fire could shape it. You didn't need vast trade routes or royal foundries. And your quirky truth? Some of the oldest iron artefacts ever found, predating widespread ironworking, do come from meteorites. A dagger from an Egyptian tomb. Beads from ancient Turkey. Sky iron was not just myth. It was real and rare and sacred. In your village, Harren becomes a symbol, not just of new technology, but of the idea that the world might be shifting again, not collapsing, but turning, spiralling towards something unfamiliar. Daro reacts exactly as you'd expect. He commissions a tool, nothing extravagant, just a hoe. He calls it a practical gift to the community. But the message is clear. Iron bends for him now. Ashra watches this unfold with her usual silence, until one morning she asks to trade something with Harren herself. She offers a piece of obsidian, shaped, polished, beautifully balanced. Says it was passed down from her mother. Not valuable in a practical sense, but rich with memory. Harren accepts the trade and gives her a small iron needle in return. Not for sewing, he says, for carving. She takes it and begins working on something in private. You don't ask what. Tensions rise. The new cache fills, slowly. The second granary isn't secret anymore. Daro knows. But he hasn't tried to shut it down. Yet. Instead, he tightens his circle. Only his scribes have access to full grain inventories. Some elders are excluded from meetings, new lists are drawn up, duties, responsibilities, punishments. Then the tremors return just after nightfall, subtle at first. A shiver in the roof beams, a tilt in the hanging oil lamp. You all freeze, trained now to listen. Then a jolt, deep and low, like something enormous shifting in its sleep. Cracks appear in 3 homes. A water jar tips and shatters. Someone screams in the dark, but it's just a child dreaming of the fish that came out of the dirt last season. By morning things look the same, but the people do not. Ashra stands before the village that day and says one word: move. Darrow counters immediately, says it's fear-mongering, that the last tremor caused minimal disruption. He calls for strength, stability, staying put. But the second granary group is already packing. Not all of them, not most, but enough. Enough to shift the balance. You're one of them. Your mother, your sister, your aunt with her bark ledgers, Ashra, the smith, surprisingly, even a few of Darrow's closest former allies. You're not fleeing, you're relocating. That's the phrase people use. But in your gut, you know what this is. It's the beginning of something else. Again. Here's the scholarly debate. Was early Iron Age mobility strategic or desperate? Were villagers abandoning homes or reclaiming freedom? There's evidence for both. Sometimes people left because they had to. Other times because they wanted to avoid corruption, to find better land, to shed the skin of systems that no longer fit. You don't know yet what your reason will be remembered as, but as you walk the ridge, with goats ahead and pack slung low, the earth warm beneath your feet and the air trembling like something about to speak, you feel, in your chest, a truth sharper than any iron blade. You're not walking away from a village, you're walking toward one that hasn't been built yet, but it's there, waiting. You don't call it exile, no one does. That word is too sharp, too bitter, and besides, no one forced you out. Darrow didn't raise his voice. No spears were drawn, no proclamations nailed to doorways. It was all unspoken, a slow reorganization of space, until you and the others simply no longer fit in the shape of the village as it had become. So you left. With full packs, a shared cart, a trail of children chasing goats, and not a single backward glance. Okay, maybe one. You walked with the sunrise behind you and your shadows long across the stones, up the narrow ridge trail and through a grove that used to mark the boundary of the old land. Ashra led without leading. She carried no title, gave no commands. She just moved like the ground itself was pulling her toward something, and the rest of you followed. The first night you slept under the stars, 23 bodies bundled in blankets around 4 small fires. No walls, no rules, no ration charts. Just the quiet hum of tired voices and the sound of someone laughing at a joke too soft to hear. You felt free. You also felt like your insides had been scooped out and filled with fog. Hope and loss braided together, like the cords holding your water skin shut. By the third day you found the place. It wasn't much. A low basin tucked into the shoulder of a hill, ringed with thin trees and overlooking a trickle of a stream that barely qualified as a river. There were ruins there, too, old stone outlines of something forgotten, maybe a granary, maybe a shrine, maybe just a cluster of homes that belonged to a village that never made it into the stories. The stones were covered in lichen and fire scars. You could smell the ash, even though it had rained since then, long since. Ashra walked the perimeter, knelt at the stream, pressed her hands into the mud and said, "This is the place." No one argued, and so a village was born. Not named, not yet. You all agreed that names should come after a place reveals itself, not before. For now, you just called it here, as in, we'll meet back here, or set the baskets here, or the goats got out again, and now they're over there instead of here. It worked. You began with what you had. Salvaged beams, old thatch, stone tools, rope made from twisted flax. Harron, the ironsmith, built a forge from clay and ash and fed it with goat dung until the coals burned hot enough to soften a nail. You had 4 iron blades among you. They were named, passed around, sharpened on river stones like heirlooms. You used them with the reverence normally reserved for relics or the last good pair of sandals in a family of 6. Ashra focused on shelter. Your aunt oversaw the food stores. You and your sister handled water collection, and the repair of an old cistern you found half buried beneath the edge of the hill. It took 5 days of digging, and on the 6th, the water ran clean and cold. You all drank too fast and got sick, but it was worth it. Each evening you gathered around the fire, tired and sore, and shared what had gone wrong. Because let's be honest, something always went wrong, and what had gone right, which was usually just enough to keep going. And after the talking faded, Ashra would bring out the iron needle Harron had given her, and carve into thin slips of bark. Symbols. Not writing exactly, not yet, but shared meanings. A bird for movement, a cracked sun for danger, a curved line with a dot for water. A spiral still meant what it always had. Survival in motion. Here's your historical fact. In the early post-collapse years, long before widespread literacy returned, many communities used symbolic systems to record and communicate, part writing, part ritual. Not all symbols were phonetic. Some represented concepts, patterns of seasons or instructions. They were scratched onto bark, carved into bone, or arranged with stones on the ground. Precursors to alphabets, born from necessity. And your fringe detail. In one site, archaeologists found a pit filled with small flat stones, each painted with a symbol and buried with no pattern. One theory suggests they were drawn at meetings, tokens of memory or decisions made, and buried to mark the conclusion of a group's collective vow, like erasing a blackboard by burying it in the ground. Your group didn't bury your bark slips. You hung them from trees, dozens of them, dangling from branches by bits of twine. Over time they began to clack in the wind, a soft, language-shaped chime that echoed through the wood grove. You started calling it the bark song. One morning you woke to find that someone, no one admitted it, had hung a new one. A spiral inside a square. It was new, unfamiliar. You asked Ashra what it meant. She looked at it for a long time, then said, "A village that remembers where it began." And suddenly you knew. The name of this place was coming. Not now, but soon. You tried not to think about what Daro was doing. Whether his grip was tightening, whether those who'd stayed behind still remembered your names. You didn't ask if anyone missed you. You didn't wonder if anyone would follow, but one night while sorting grain, your sister gasped and pointed to the ridge. A torch, one and then two, then three figures, travellers, from the village. No one spoke. You just stood, breath held as they approached. Careful, slow, heads low in deference or apology or both. The first one to speak was a young woman you remembered as a scribe's assistant. She held a bark scroll in both hands and said, "We were told not to come." She paused, then added, "We came anyway." Ashra stepped forward, took the scroll, unrolled it, read the marks, then looked at you. "They're coming apart," she said. Daro had gone too far, had tightened too much, had forgotten, in his need for order, what the spiral always meant. Not perfection, not control, but motion. Here's the scholars' debate. After collapse, did communities that split apart eventually rejoin? Or did they simply evolve into something new? Some argue that decentralization created better resilience. Others say fragmentation led to more collapse. But from where you're standing, watching new people arrive at a place you helped build, the answer is clear. You didn't leave a village, you planted one, and now it's beginning to bloom. The morning after the new arrivals are welcomed, after they're fed, given sleeping mats, and folded into the nightly rhythm of soft songs and firelight, you wake up early, earlier than usual. The air feels different, thinner somehow, like the sky has pulled back its curtain a little to let more of the world in. There's dew on the grass, fog in the lower field, and the faint smell of fish being dried somewhere uphill. You sit up slowly, stretch, and spot the girl who brought the scroll from the old village walking near the grove. She's barefoot, her hair tied back with a strip of old sailcloth, and she moves with the careful grace of someone not yet sure she's allowed to belong. You follow her, not out of suspicion, but because you're curious, and maybe a little protective. She doesn't notice you until she reaches the edge of the grove where the bark slips hang. She pauses there, listening. You watch her reach up and touch one, just gently, like it's a memory. Then after a moment she pulls something from her pouch. Another bark strip, already etched. She doesn't hang it right away, just holds it in both hands, breathing slow and steady. Then she finds a branch and ties it up herself, stepping back to make sure it swings freely in the wind. You wait until she's walked away before you approach. The slip is light, pale, freshly carved. Its symbol is new to you, 2 curved lines flanking a single downward arrow. You stare at it for a long time before Ashra steps beside you. "It means return," she says quietly. "Not the old kind, not back to what was. It's a return to forward." You nod, slowly. You don't know how that makes sense, but it does. By midday, word has spread. More may be coming, maybe dozens, maybe more. Not just from your old village, but from further, settlements that didn't split apart, but fell. Collapsed under weight, drought, power, or just time. No one's leading them. They are finding you by rumor, by chance, by symbols scratched into the trees. left on river stones whispered at trade posts. The spiral, once a mark of endurance, has become a map. That afternoon, the village meets under the crooked cedar tree, the one with the split trunk and a family of small birds nesting inside. It's not formal, there's no voting, just a circle. That's enough. You all agree the grove can't hold everyone. The field needs expansion, the water source must be shared but not strained. Food must stretch, shelters must multiply, and so the work begins again. But this time it doesn't feel like survival, it feels like planning. You draw paths between the homes, not just letting them sprawl wherever there's space. You mark a new gathering circle with stones, laid carefully in the spiral pattern now familiar to everyone. Children help carry wood. Ashra carves new slips. Haran sharpens blades with practiced patience. He's begun training others too, passing on the secrets of iron like a recipe that can't be written down. And slowly, the chaos becomes community. Here's your historical fact. Long after the collapse, many settlements weren't rebuilt in the exact footprint of the old ones. They sprang up nearby, along rivers or trade paths, often repurposing old foundations but rethinking their layout. Smaller, more cooperative, less centralized. This wasn't regression, it was redesign. And for your strange detail, one village site showed signs of being moved not once but 3 times, within a single generation. Each move was only a few hundred meters, but each had a cleaner layout, better water access, and more even spacing between homes. The people weren't just surviving, they were iterating. Back in your growing village, still unnamed, though now jokingly called again by some, you're tasked with building the new grain shed. You recruit 3 others, including the girl from under the grove. Her name is Sarah, and she works quickly, silently, with the kind of intensity usually found in wild animals, or those who've lost more than they say. You learn she once lived near a great inland lake, that her family drowned, not in water, but in bureaucracy, forced to give up grain they didn't have to a leader who was too proud to admit the stores had run dry. She fled before the hunger reached her, but it caught others. She doesn't talk about faith or spirals or survival, she just works, and you grow to admire that. One night after the fire dies down, you catch her watching the slips again. She says, "I thought the world was ending. I didn't think there'd be anything after." She doesn't cry, just says it like she's describing a storm that passed. You nod, then say, "Maybe the end isn't a wall, maybe it's a turn." But she thinks about that, then points to the slip she hung, the return arrow. "Or a circle," she says. That night the tremors return, but this time faint, a murmur. The ground sways, but nothing falls. In the morning the water from the cistern is still clear. The wind is calm. You almost wonder if the earth is just clearing its throat now and again, reminding you it's still part of this. When the next wave of newcomers arrives, you're ready. Not just with food and mats and fire, but with structure. There's a process now. Newcomers are welcomed in the circle. They're given a carved token, a smooth stone with a simple spiral to mark their place. They hang their own slip, their own story in the grove, and when a child draws a map in the dirt, tiny spirals connected by lines like a constellation. Someone suggests building a version of it on bark. A shared record, a proto-map. You help carve it, one line at a time. It's rough and incomplete and wildly speculative in places, but it's a start. Here's the ongoing scholarly debate. After a collapse, what matters more, preserving the past or creating new systems? Some say memory is power, others argue memory is a trap, but maybe it's neither. Maybe memory, like iron, is just a tool. What matters is how you shape it. That evening, a woman who's just arrived, her clothes tattered, her voice hoarse from dust, sits beside the fire and sings. No one knows the song, not even her. She says her grandmother used to hum it during storms. You hum along anyway. You fall asleep with that tune in your head. And in your dream, the spiral becomes a garden. Rows of crops planted in curves following the shape of wind and water. A village where the path forward is never straight, but it's always yours to walk. The map takes shape faster than anyone expected. It begins as a curiosity, a way to pass time in the evenings. A sketch on bark, then a carving on a flat stone slab, each spiral a remembered village, each line a path someone swears they once walked. At first, it's mostly guesswork and memory, but as more travellers arrive, more pieces fall into place. A woman from the north recognises a river bend marked in charcoal. A boy from the coast recalls the hill where his brother buried a sun-dried fish for luck. Someone else confirms the tale of a twin mountain that looks like a broken tooth, and everyone agrees that yes, that's the place where clay gets red and sticky and sticks to your boots for days. Before long, the one slab becomes more than a symbol, it's a living record. Every night, people gather around it, adding pebbles, scraping in new marks, tying bits of reed to indicate fresh arrivals or vanished paths. You catch yourself checking it each morning, not just for orientation, but for reassurance. Proof that things are connecting, that the world is getting bigger again, but not more distant. The village, still called here more often than not, is no longer just a camp of survivors. It's a node, a place people seek on purpose. The homes are sturdier now, some with stone bases, others with thatched roofs woven in spiral patterns. The children play a game where they pretend to be messengers carrying news from village to village. The rules make no sense, but the joy does. Ashra oversees less and listens more. Her hands are usually busy, tending to the sick, shaping slips, reinforcing the southern trail where erosion has carved deep scars into the slope. She still doesn't call herself a leader, but people ask her before they ask anyone else. You spend your days helping build the second well, deeper than the first. It's grueling work, stone, dirt, water, repeat. But there's something satisfying about the rhythm. Each time the bucket brings up a little more mud, a little less stone, it feels like a small victory. You don't speak much while working. You and Sarah just dig, pass tools, share water, and nod when the other points something out. It's the kind of friendship that doesn't need talking. One afternoon, while resting in the shade, she tells you a story. It's about her mother, a weaver, quiet, strong, with the patience of a stone. She used to say that threads are stubborn. If you pull too hard, they snap. If you leave them too loose, they unravel. The trick was balance, pressure and give, strength and slack, and that's how a good village should be woven too. You carry that story with you into the evening meeting. The air smells of cooked lentils and damp clay. Someone burned dried flowers in the fire pit, and the scent, sharp, floral, unfamiliar, hugs your clothes. A boy recites a poem he learned from a traveller, a strange, choppy thing about a city with no doors. No one understands it, but they listen. Then a new group arrives, 12 of them, mud-covered. Lean with travel, carrying little but hope, and 3 fish smoked nearly to dust. They don't say much at first, just sit, drink, eat, sleep. But the next morning one of them, a man with a ruined sandal and a face like an old tree, shares something. A warning. They came through a valley east of here. Empty, they thought. Until nightfall, when they saw the lights. Not torches, fires, and not from a village. A camp, armed, organised, not travellers, not survivors, raiders. Not like the sea peoples, he says. These ones, they're settling, taking. You don't breathe for a moment. He says they didn't speak. Just watched from the hills, faces painted, blades too clean to be old. They don't want to trade, he adds. They're building something, walls, forts, but not for defence. Ashra listens quietly. She doesn't flinch, but her eyes harden. Later she calls a quiet council, not a panic, just preparation. Scouts are sent, not soldiers, your village has no soldiers, but quick-footed messengers with sharp eyes and better instincts. Routes are reviewed. Grain stores moved underground, watch schedules lengthened, but nothing overt, nothing loud. Fear spreads faster when it hears its name. Here's your historical anchor. In the wake of the Bronze Age collapse, some new powers did not rise through trade or diplomacy, but by force. Fortified settlements, martial cults, and roving bands sometimes filled the void left by toppled empires. They weren't all villains, but many were opportunists, building their own order atop others' ashes. And your fringe fact? A burned village site in Anatolia revealed a chilling pattern. Homes destroyed but grain stores untouched. Weapons removed. Animals herded away, not slaughtered. It suggested not massacre, but calculated acquisition. Conquest without waste, the scholarly debate, still ongoing. Were these new forces proto-states? Warbands? Survivors gone rogue? Or simply the inevitable shape power takes when left unsupervised for too long? In your village, the response is subtle. You carve a new symbol into the edge of the map, 3 vertical lines beneath a jagged arch. Not everyone knows what it means. Not everyone needs to. And then, amid all this tension, the sky gives you a gift. Rain. Real, soaking, silver-threaded rain. It arrives at dawn, sudden and heavy, blanketing everything in sound. You run outside barefoot, laughing like a child, mud splashing your legs. Around you the village erupts in joy. Children scream, adults weep. Pots are dragged outside to catch every drop. Ashra just stands there, arms wide, head tilted to the clouds, smiling. You watch the rain run down her cheeks and realise something. This isn't the end of collapse. It's the beginning of weather again, the beginning of seasons returning, the beginning of life rebalancing itself. You sit that night by the fire, drying your feet, listening to the soft clatter of bark slips in the breeze, and feel it in your chest. The spiral isn't shrinking, it's widening. New lines, new people, new dangers, yes, but also new chances. The rain doesn't stop for 3 days, not a downpour, more like a long, patient exhale from the sky. It soaks into the fields, runs down your cheeks, pools in every cracked stone and shallow depression, like it's trying to heal what the sun and wind once tried to erase. The world smells clean and ancient again. Wet bark, churned earth, ash rising faint from the long-dormant fire pits. You wake each morning to the sound of water dripping off thatch roofs and the low murmur of people checking floodlines, patching leaks, wringing out their woven cloaks by the fire. No one complains, not once, because this is what you've all been waiting for. Not just rain, but rhythm. Not just survival, but signs that the land is listening again. The stream by the village swells until it flows clear and fast, finally worthy of the name River. The cistern fills, the second well floods and must be bailed by hand. Children play in the mud, slipping and screaming with the kind of laughter that doesn't carry fear beneath it. Even the goats seem calmer. The earth is changing again, not shaking this time, but breathing. Ashra says the rain is a blessing, but a challenge too. She gathers you and a handful of others near the newly expanded bark map, where someone's carved tiny grooves to represent waterways, now gushing. The world is opening again, she says, tracing a path toward the northeast, and not all that comes through will be good. She's right. The scouts return drenched and silent with confirmation. The raiders from the valley are moving. Slow, methodical, not random. They've built a stockade, a square-walled camp, spears, a smoke, a flag. You don't know what the symbol means, but you know it's not a spiral. It's a split circle, jagged in the centre, like something once whole now broken on purpose. They are claiming land, the scout says, her voice flat, and they don't ask before they egg it. The village tightens again. You hold a gathering, not to vote, not to panic, but to think. People offer ideas, build a watchtower, hide the map, send decoys to mislead newcomers, bury the metal, bury the food, bury yourselves. Ashra listens, Sira speaks. Even Harren, who usually says little, stands and holds up one of his duller iron blades. We didn't make these to fight, he says, but we can. No one claps, but no one argues. Here's your historical fact. After the collapse, defence became more local, more immediate. Gone were the professional armies of palatial states. Instead, small fortified settlements emerged, with towers, ditches, barricades. Defence was no longer a job, it was a necessity. Even in peace, every home was built with escape in mind. Your odd little archaeological tidbit? A site once thought to be a farmstead turned out to have an underground tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, leading from the main house to a thicket near a streambed. It wasn't built by architects, it was dug, quietly, over time, a way out that no one ever spoke of aloud. Back in your village, Sira starts digging her own tunnel. No announcement, just a hole behind the grain shed covered each night with reeds and clay. You help her when you can, others begin their own versions, some less subtle, some just as hidden. No one calls them escape routes, but no one has to. Still, life continues. The rain eventually fades into mist, and the fields green in earnest. The first signs of barley shoot through the mud. Chickens from the northern ridge, gifted by a trader who stumbled in half-starved and trembling, start laying. Someone rediscovers a way to smoke fish without souring it, and suddenly meals are less about chewing leather and more about planning for tomorrow. The map expands again. You sit with Ashra one night, both of you watching a child press a new token into the soft bark. Her own village symbol, a curling wave crossed with an arrow. She says it means safe tide. She doesn't explain further. Ashra sighs. I keep thinking we'll run out of room, she says, but the spiral never ends. You nod, but something's been gnawing at you. What if they come? You ask quietly. She looks at you. They will. You wait for reassurance, a plan, something. Instead, she says, we'll do what people always do. We'll change again. Here's the scholarly debate. Did communities that survived the Bronze Age collapse do so because they resisted change, or because they embraced it? Some argue that survival came through holding on to old rituals and traditions. Others believe flexibility was the key, that those who adapted their beliefs, their architecture, their trade, their governance were the ones who endured. And maybe it's both. Maybe memory is the root, and change is the bloom. That night, around the fire, Sierra tells the story of the lake again. This time others listen differently. You realise she's told it before, but now she's performing it. Hands gesturing, voice rising, pausing just right. And when she finishes, there's silence, followed by a slow hum that becomes a song. Someone adds a beat with their palm against a pot, then a whistle. Then a harmony. And in that moment you realise something profound. You're not just surviving, you're becoming culture again. You have songs now. You have stories that outlived the people who lived them. You have a symbol language that stretches from the coast to the mountains. You're not just recording the collapse anymore. You're writing the sequel. And when you lie down that night, wrapped in a blanket that smells like smoke and crushed time, you dream of a future someone else will inherit. A child tracing spirals into clay, unaware of how fragile it all once was. A child who doesn't remember collapse, only beginning. The first weapon arrives wrapped in wool, not carried by a raider, not taken in a raid, but brought to you, offered freely by a trader from the highlands who arrives on foot with cracked lips, bleeding heels, and eyes that have clearly seen something too large for one lifetime. He doesn't speak at first, just holds out the bundle. You and Ashra are the ones who unwrap it. A curved blade, iron, a finely made, fitted with the dark wooden handle bound in sinew. It gleams in the sun, clean and cold, like a thought you didn't want to have, but recognise as truth the moment you hear it spoken aloud. The trader finally speaks. They're coming for iron. And that's when you understand, and it's not about territory, not about people, not even about power, not in the way Daro used to grip it like a staff he carved himself. It's about resources, ore, tools, knowledge. Iron is no longer a curiosity, it's currency. And your village is one of the few places in the region where someone still knows how to work it. Harren is no longer just a smith. He's a node, a threat. A target. You don't announce a war, you don't panic. But everyone hears the hum behind the news, like thunder under clear skies. Sierra, for one, stops waiting. She assembles her group, mostly young, sharp-eyed, quiet, and begins patrols. Not soldiers, not yet. Scouts, watchers, observers of paths. They sleep with their shoes near their heads and their blades tucked into their cloaks. You notice the way they look at trees, always checking for movement, listening for breaks in birdsong. You help reinforce the map's slab with a low wall. Not to keep it safe, but to signal that it matters. That it's not just a chart of villages, but a web. Every new mark carved into it adds to the growing realization. This isn't a single settlement anymore. It's part of a system, not a kingdom, not a state, something more fluid. Something that can bend when pressure comes, something that doesn't need a palace to speak. Here's your historical fact. In the post-collapse landscape, alliances between villages and emerging communities didn't look like old empires. They were informal networks, often united by trade, marriage, and shared symbols. Think postal routes more than armies. Resilience came not from walls, but from connection. And your fringe discovery. In the ruins of an early Iron Age village, archaeologists found a ring of stones arranged in a spiral, each engraved with different symbols: spiral, tree, sun, hand, and one stone bore marks from at least 4 different cultural groups, suggesting not conquest but cooperation. A meeting place, a spoke in a wheel. Ashra says, they think we'll hold still. She's sitting with Harren and your aunt, sketching ideas for a new forge, one that can be disassembled and moved if needed. Your village is learning how to become a mobile idea. You build quietly, strategically. A third granary, this one buried into the hill, dry, secret. The map is duplicated onto bark sheets and hidden in 3 separate caches. You teach children how to recognize signal fires. 2 quick bursts means arriving, 3 long ones. Retreat, 1 steady burn at night. Circle and wait. The village doesn't stop growing though. That's the strange part. Even under threat, people still come. A woman with salt in her hair and 2 children who never speak. A former scribe who keeps folded slips of old palace poetry tucked into his tunic. A boy who draws spirals with both hands at once and asks to carve them into stone. They are not refugees, not really. They're contributors. Every one of them brings something, a memory, a skill, a new word, a recipe, a pattern. And every night you hear new languages echo around the fire. Some of them already rhyme. One morning, Ashra gathers everyone. No warning, just a call, 3 drum beats, low and steady. You all gather in the circle beneath the split cedar. She says, "It's time to name this place." There's a moment, one of those rare moments where the wind stops and the birds hush, and even the trees seem to lean in. Ashra looks at the bark slips, the map, the marks, at all of you, and she says, "We're not the centre," then gestures upward, toward the stars just now fading with dawn. We're a point on the spiral. We move, we change, but we stay connected. Then she steps back. No vote, no argument, just a name whispered first, then louder. Naros. It means spiral in the old river tongue. It also means path in a dialect no one remembers fully, but someone once spoke aloud during a thunderstorm. And so you live in Naros now, not a city, not a state, a hub, a signpost for those still wandering, a reminder that collapse isn't the end of everything, it's the reassembly of meaning. You begin carving the word into the map's slab. It takes hours. Your fingers cramp, you cut yourself once, but when you finish, the village gathers to touch it. Not all at once, just a hand here, a finger there, like a blessing, like they're sealing something sacred. The scouts return that evening with news. The raider camp has split, half moved north, half circled east. You wait, you prepare, you teach everyone how to scatter, you teach the children how to vanish, you train with blades that still feel too heavy. You write down what matters, and hide it well. Here's the current scholarly theory. The most successful post-collapse communities weren't those that mimicked fallen kingdoms. They were those that knew how to fragment and reform, like cells, like songs, like rain returning to soil. Flexibility was a memory. Structure was shared. No crown, no throne, just people spiraling together. That night someone plays the flute, one carved from a hollow reed pulled from the river last season. You didn't even know it still worked. And someone else sings. Not a war song, a lullaby. It doesn't matter who falls asleep first, or who stays awake to watch the edge of the trees, because in Naros everything circles back. Everything has a place, even the end. You wake to silence, not the peaceful kind hubti, not the gentle hush of a dew-wrapped morning where birds aren't up yet. This silence is tight, like the air itself has stopped breathing. You lie still on your mat, eyes open, heart already knowing before your ears confirm it. No goats bleating, no fire being stoked, no bark chimes clattering in the breeze, just nothing. Then the horn sounds, 3 quick bursts, arrival. You're on your feet before the sound finishes echoing through the trees. Your hands find your belt, the one with the iron blade looped through it. You haven't had to draw it yet. You're not sure if you can. But you carry it anyway, because Naros carries more than food and stories now. You move quickly through the settlement. Others do the same, emerging from homes, shoulders squared, eyes wide. No screaming, no stampede, everyone remembers. This is what you prepared for. Ashra stands at the central tree, her hand raised, not for calm but as a signal. Scouts have returned. Dusty, breathing hard, eyes like flint. They're close, one says. Too close, 2 dozen, maybe more. Armed, moving straight for us. Someone whispers. Did they follow someone? The scout shakes her head. They knew. The unspoken question hovers between everyone. Who told them? No time to ask it aloud. Ashra takes a breath. We don't hold ground. We hold each other. You know what to do. And you do. Naros was never built to be defended like a fortress. It was built like a nest, flexible, hidden in plain sight, layered, fractal. The spiral is in everything, even the way the shelters can vanish under tree boughs, how the path becomes 3 paths, then none at all. Children are already being moved to the tunnels, to the ravines. Fire pits are doused. The map slab is wrapped in clay and buried beneath the stone circle in a ritual that takes only seconds now. You run with Sira to the granary hill. She opens the side tunnel while you roll the stone over the main entrance. Inside you stash the most critical tools: Harren's iron, Ashra's carved slips, the spare water skins, the bark bundles holding knowledge no one's memorized yet. Then you hear it. Footsteps, voices. Not panicked, confident, too close. Sira pulls you into the narrow passage just as the first figures appear in the clearing. They wear armour, some of it bronze, dented and scavenged, some of it mismatched iron plates sewn into leather. Their leader steps ahead, helmetless, skin weathered, eyes calculating. His gaze moves slowly across the field, the homes, the fire pits, not confusion, not curiosity, just confirmation. He expected this, expected the village to try and disappear, but he also knows how to follow the spiral now. That's what you realise as you watch from the shadows. Someone gave them the pattern, maybe a deserter, maybe a captive, maybe someone who thought they'd be saving themselves. You don't have time to care. You wait, breath caught, blade trembling in your hand. They poke through homes, overturn stones, test door frames. They're not burning, not yet. This isn't destruction, this is cataloguing. They're trying to claim Naros. Here's your historical fact. After the collapse, some fortified groups didn't just destroy settlements. They assimilated them, claimed the structures, took the food, painted over the old symbols with new ones. That's how some early Iron Age cultures spread. Not through fire and blood, but through quiet conquest, taking without asking, replacing. And here's the eerie archaeological find. One site held layers of paint. Beneath a wall mural of warriors, someone discovered an older spiral design, scrubbed but not fully erased. The new power didn't build, it rewrote. Back in Naros, the raiders find nothing of value. No iron tools, no stores, no people, just the shape of something that clearly existed. They stay a few hours, long enough to scratch their own mark into the tree bark. One of them even carves a jagged circle into a beam above the fire pit. Then they leave. Just like that. Gone. You don't move until the sun is nearly down. The light turns gold, then rust, then fades. Only then do the hidden ones begin to emerge, one by one, from tunnels, from trees, from the thickets by the stream. Quiet, ashen, eyes wide, but breathing. Ashra stands again in the circle. She doesn't speak, just kneels, presses her palm into the dirt where the map once was, and closes her eyes. You follow her lead. Everyone does. That night there's no fire, no song, just the sound of the wind and the bark chimes, now rehung with care. Each one checks to see what might still be readable. You find yours, the one you carved moons ago, still swinging, still yours. The next day you do what people have always done after the worst arrives and leaves again. You rebuild, but this time differently. You dig new roots, ones that don't look like roots. Homes are remade farther apart, interwoven with the trees. Symbols are rethought. Some slip carvings are now written in code. Spirals within spirals. Abstract shapes that only Naros will understand. Harren's forge is rebuilt deep into the hillside, vented through a fake goat shelter. A new map slab is made, this time out of clay that can be broken, scattered, burned if needed. Sira trains harder now. Her shouts become shadows. They map the world in reverse, finding what not to touch, where not to be seen. Even the children learn to vanish in silence. You don't want war, you don't crave revenge, you just want to remain yourselves. And somehow, even after all of it, you still gather each night. Still eat, still hum, still name. A new spiral is etched into the fire ring. A tighter one, almost square, nested in the old. A reminder. Naros didn't fall. It flexed. Here's the scholarly debate. Did communities like this really survive? Or were they just lost to history, their stories whispered out of record? Some say only the big names, the resurgent kingdoms, the rising cities, tell the tale of recovery. But others argue the quiet ones, the hidden ones, the Naros-shaped ones, they were the heartbeats. They were the continuity. And you lived it. You rebuilt it. You remember. You lie down that night in a rebuilt home, the roof stitched with vine, the air cool against your skin, and you whisper the name of someone you lost. Not because it changes anything, but because it keeps them here. In the spiral, in the map, in the place that wasn't erased. The rains come again, not in storming floods this time, but in waves, gentle, persistent, like the sky is practicing the rhythm of breathing. They soak the ash out of the tree bark, soften the clay underfoot, and leave the entire settlement cloaked in a shining sheen dome, as if the world has been glazed fresh. You wake to the sound of dripping, and for the first time in a long while it doesn't fill you with dread. There's a new feeling now in Naros. Not joy, not triumph, something quieter, a kind of settled defiance, the kind that grows when you realise you've been bent, broken and scattered, and yet you're still here.